Welcome back, my friends. Tonight, we're stepping into one of America's most terrifying and enduring legends. A story woven with mystery, tragedy, and the unexplained. The Mothman. For decades, this winged creature with glowing red eyes has haunted the skies over Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and beyond. From its first recorded sightings in the 1960s, to its ties with disaster and doom, to modern-day encounters that still chill witnesses to their core. The Mothman is more than just a local myth, it's a global phenomenon. Some say it is a harbinger of death. Others believe it is a guardian, warning us of tragedies before they strike. But all who have seen it agree on one thing. Once you meet the Mothman, you are never the same again. So light a candle, settle into the shadows, and join me as we explore the 25 most haunting legends of the Mothman. On a chilly November night in 1966, the quiet town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, would be thrust into a legend that would ripple through generations. It began with a simple drive, the kind young couples often took to escape the stillness of small-town life. To couples, Roger and Linda Scarberry, along with Steve and Mary Millette, found themselves heading toward the abandoned munitions factory known locally as the TNT area. The site was a relic of World War II, with decaying bunkers and tangled paths of weeds and brush. A place that carried its own aura of unease even before that night's events. As they turned down the lonely road, headlights cutting across the cracked pavement, the atmosphere felt charged, as though the night itself was holding its breath. Then, out of the darkness, something emerged that would leave the four witnesses shaken to their core. Standing near the road was a figure unlike anything they had ever seen. It was massive, at least 6 or 7 feet tall, with broad, feathered wings folded against its back. But the most horrifying feature was its eyes. They glowed an intense, burning red, reflecting the headlights with an unnatural brilliance. Panic set in instantly. The couples had no frame of reference for what they were seeing. Was it human, animal, or something else entirely? Linda, terrified, urged Roger to step on the gas. The car roared forward, but the creature did not retreat. Instead, it moved with them. The witnesses described how the thing unfurled its wings and launched into the air. Its wingspan was massive, wider than the car itself. It followed directly above them, swooping down and keeping pace with their vehicle, even as the speedometer climbed. Roger pushed the car to nearly 100 miles per hour. But no matter how fast they went, the winged being stayed with them. Its glowing eyes locked on the car as though it were toying with its prey. The sound of its wings beating against the night was unlike anything they had ever heard, a heavy, rhythmic thrum that carried through the air. Mary would later say it was just the creature's appearance that filled her with dread, but the way it moved, with a terrifying speed and unnatural grace. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity, the being broke off its pursuit. The couples raced back into town, pale and trembling, their voices overlapping in frantic attempts to explain what had happened. They knew what they had seen, but how could anyone else believe them? Still, they decided to report it. They drove straight to the Mason County Courthouse and told Deputy Sheriff Millard Halstead about their encounter. Halstead later recalled that they were truly shaken. These weren't wild-eyed drifters spinning tales. These were ordinary young people, working class, known in the community, not prone to hysteria. Their sincerity was impossible to dismiss. He noted their pale faces, their trembling hands, the kind of fear that couldn't be faked. Word of the sighting spread quickly, and soon the story was on the front page of the Point Pleasant Register. The newspaper headline would forever immortalize the moment. Couples see man-sized bird, creature, something. It was here that the legend of the Mothman was born. Skeptics, of course, tried to rationalize the encounter. Some suggested the couples had seen a large bird, perhaps a sandhill crane or a barred owl. But none of these explanations fit. No bird could match the size they described, nor could any bird pursue a speeding car at such impossible speeds. And those glowing red eyes were something no natural creature possessed. For the four witnesses, the night became an unshakable memory. Linda Scarberry would later say that after the encounter, she experienced recurring nightmares about the creature. In her dreams, She would see those burning eyes, watching from the shadows, waiting. The sense of being followed never left her. What made the event even more disturbing was that it was only the beginning. Within days, other residents of Point Pleasant began reporting strange sightings. Some claimed to see a giant bird-like figure flying over the TNT plant, while others heard unearthly screeches echoing across the trees. Each account only deepened the mystery and added to the growing unease within the community. But it was that first sighting, the chase down the dark country roads, that cemented the Mothman in folklore. To the witnesses, it was not a story or a legend. It was a memory carved into their minds. They had seen something that defied explanation, something monstrous and impossible. And once the tale spread, Point Pleasant would never be the same. The old TNT plant, once just a relic of the past, became ground zero for sightings and investigations. Reporters, researchers, and curiosity seekers descended upon the town, hoping to catch a glimpse of the red-eyed terror. Some came away with strange stories of their own, while others dismissed it all as mass hysteria. Still, the legend endured. That November night in 1966 became the cornerstone of a mystery that would stretch into decades of sightings, theories, and speculation. Was the Mothman a cryptid, a supernatural entity, or perhaps a harbinger of disaster? No one could say for certain, but for Roger, Linda, Steve, and Mary, the answer was simple. They knew what they saw. They had felt its pursuit, seen its wings stretch across the night sky, and stared into the burning gaze of its crimson eyes. In November 1966, a small group of gravediggers in Clandine, West Virginia, prepared a burial site as the late afternoon sun sank behind the ridges. The cemetery, perched on a quiet hill and surrounded by thick forest, was hushed except for the sound of shovels cutting into earth and the distant caw of crows. It was the sort of work that demanded steady hands and patience. But for the men on that chilly evening, something was about to disrupt their routine in a way that none of them would ever forget. As they worked, one of the men happened to glance upward, expecting perhaps to see a hawk or buzzard circling above. Instead, his eyes locked on a massive, dark figure moving smoothly along the treetops. Its wings were immense, stretching far wider than any bird native to the region. At first, he called out to the others, joking that it must have been a huge heron or perhaps even an owl. But as they all raised their eyes skyward, their laughter quickly turned to silence. The figure wasn't flapping its wings in the way a bird would. Instead, it seemed to glide, shifting unnaturally through the air as though carried by some invisible force. Its shape was vaguely humanoid, with a thick body that appeared too large and too solid to belong to any ordinary animal. The longer the men watched, the more they realized this was no ordinary bird, no known creature of the woods or sky. And then it turned its head. What had looked like nothing more than a silhouette against the fading light revealed itself in a moment that seared itself into their memories forever. The head swiveled in an almost deliberate motion, fixing them with eyes that glowed a deep, unnatural red. They weren't reflections of sunlight or the glint of an animal's gaze in the dark. They burned with their own intensity, to blazing embers in the twilight sky. The gravediggers froze. One man stumbled backward into the half-dug grave, scrambling out with panic written across his face. Another dropped his shovel, the metallic clang breaking the eerie silence that had descended over the group. None of them dared speak at first, too afraid that if they made a sound, the thing might swoop down upon them. The figure lingered in the air above the treetops, watching them. The wings shifted, stretching out wider as though to emphasize their sheer size. In that instant, each man felt an unshakable dread, the kind of primal terror that seemed to bypass logic and burrow straight into the soul. It was indeed just the sight of the creature that horrified them. It was the feeling that it shouldn't exist at all, that they were staring at something utterly alien, something that defied every natural law they had ever known. Finally, as if satisfied with their fear, the winged figure moved. With one smooth, unnatural motion, it glided away from the cemetery, vanishing beyond the tree line. The men remained frozen for several minutes, staring at the spot where it had disappeared. None of them wanted to be the first to speak. the first to admit that what they had seen was real. When they did finally break the silence, their words were hushed and frantic, each one repeating to the others that they couldn't possibly have seen what they thought they had. Yet deep down, they all knew the truth. In the days that followed, whispers spread quietly through Clendenin. The gravediggers didn't want to be ridiculed, but word slipped out nonetheless. Some townsfolk suggested it had been nothing more than a large bird, perhaps an owl startled from its perch. Others scoffed at the idea, pointing out that no bird in West Virginia had glowing red eyes, or a body so massive, or wings that moved in such a strange, almost deliberate way. But for the men who had been there, the memory was inescapable. Each night, when they closed their eyes, they saw the red glow cutting through the dark. Some of them claimed they heard wings in their dreams, a rustling sound like leather brushing against the sky. One admitted he never went back to that cemetery alone again. What made the Clendenin sighting so chilling was not only its timing, but also its place in the larger legend that was about to unfold. Only days later, two couples driving near the abandoned TNT plant outside Point Pleasant would encounter a nearly identical creature, one that chased their car at impossible speeds. That sighting would make headlines and mark the true birth of the Mothman legend. But in truth, it was in that lonely cemetery where the first whispers of the creature began, where the legend stretched its wings for the first time in West Virginia soil. Looking back, many now see the gravediggers' encounter as a warning, a prelude to the chaos that would grip the region for the next year. Sightings multiplied, and Point Pleasant became a hotbed of fear, fascination, and dread. But for those men in Clendenin, it was far more personal. They hadn't heard rumors or read headlines. They had seen it with their own eyes, felt its gaze burn into their very being. And perhaps that was the most frightening part of all, that the creature had chosen to reveal itself to them, in a place meant for the dead, in a cemetery where lives are laid to rest. The Mothman appeared not as a fleeting shadow, but as a silent watcher, hovering above the earth with those terrible, glowing eyes. Whether it was an omen of disaster, a creature of unknown origin, or something beyond human comprehension, the encounter left its mark. The gravediggers of Clendenin never forgot that night in 1966, and their story remains one of the earliest pieces in the chilling puzzle of the Mothman legend. The abandoned TNT plant near Point Pleasant, West Virginia, sits like a scar on the landscape, overgrown by weeds and slowly reclaimed by nature. The decaying concrete structures still hold the heavy weight of history. Built during World War II as part of a massive munitions manufacturing complex, the plant churned out explosives that fueled the war effort. After the war ended, the facility was left behind, its hollow chambers and crumbling storage bunkers slowly falling into ruin. For the locals, the site already carried an eerie air of desolation. But in the mid-1960s, it became infamous for something far more terrifying. It became the home of the Mothman. The TNT area, as residents called it, was a sprawling maze of old buildings, tunnels, and abandoned igloo-shaped bunkers where explosives were once stored. Few dared to wander there at night, but for teenagers looking for a thrill, it was a favorite hangout. In November of 1966, it became ground zero for sightings of the winged creature that would forever be linked with Point Pleasant. Those who ventured into the crumbling plant reported not just strange sounds and unsettling sensations, but terrifying encounters that left them shaken to their core. The first and most frequent reports from the TNT plant came from people who described hearing metallic clangs echoing through the empty halls. Some believed the noises were just the natural groans of a dying structure, but those who heard them swore otherwise. The sounds weren't random. They had rhythm, almost like footsteps moving along the rusted catwalks and stairways. Witnesses described the sensation of being followed, their every movement mirrored by unseen steps. When they stopped, the sound stopped. When they started again, so too did the echo of footsteps in the shadows above them. What disturbed people most was that the footsteps were often accompanied by the low, heavy sound of wings beating the air. The flapping was described as unnaturally loud, like canvas snapping in the wind, but it came in bursts that suggested something alive was moving through the cavernous ruins. Sometimes, the flapping was close, almost directly overhead, while other times it echoed from deeper in the plant, just out of reach. In more than one account, the sudden sound of wings was enough to send groups of people fleeing from the site in terror. Even those who didn't hear the footsteps or the flapping wings often reported the same thing: the undeniable feeling of being watched. The TNT plant, isolated and silent in the dead of night, seemed to amplify every instinct for danger. People said they felt a pressure on their chests, like eyes boring into them from the dark. The hair on their necks stood on end, and many described being frozen in place by a fear they couldn't explain. It wasn't just the atmosphere of the plant that unnerved them. It was the certainty that something was there, hidden in the shadows, observing. Then came the eyes. For those unlucky enough to stay long enough, the oppressive sense of being watched would sometimes culminate in the sudden appearance of glowing red eyes. They would emerge from the pitch-black corners of the plant to burning orbs hovering at a height far taller than any man. The eyes were said to glow with an inner fire, piercing through the dark with an intensity that left witnesses trembling. One group of teenagers, parked near the plant in their car, reported seeing the glowing eyes staring at them from just beyond the tree line. They described the eyes as hypnotic, so terrifying that they couldn't bring themselves to look away until the figure suddenly moved and its enormous wings unfolded. That was when the witnesses realized they weren't looking at just a pair of glowing eyes. The shadow behind them shifted, revealing a hulking figure with wings that stretched wider than the car itself. As it stepped forward, they could hear the scrape of claws against concrete and the deep, rhythmic sound of its breathing. When it launched into the air, the blast of wind it created rocked the car, and the group sped off, convinced they had just come face to face with the Mothman itself. Over the following months, dozens of similar reports came from the TNT area. Couples parking near the ruins, hunters exploring the woods, and even police officers responding to calls, all described the same terrifying elements. The clang of footsteps on metal, the rush of wings in the dark, the paralyzing sensation of being stalked, and the sudden, shocking glare of those red eyes. Some described the creature swooping low over their cars, keeping pace with them even as they accelerated, while others swore it perched on top of the plant's structures, silhouetted against the moonlight like a giant bird of prey. The abandoned TNT plant soon became synonymous with the Mothman legend. Locals warned each other to stay away, especially after sunset, and those who ignored the advice often returned pale and shaken, swearing they had encountered something that defied explanation. Paranormal investigators who visited the site in later years described the same oppressive atmosphere, noting that even without seeing the creature, the area felt charged with fear and dread. Some claimed the strange sounds and sensations were residual echoes of the past, the plant's history bleeding through into the present, while others were certain that the Mothman had made the ruins its lair. Nature has overtaken much of it, but the ruins remain, attracting curiosity seekers, thrill chasers, and paranormal enthusiasts. Many leave disappointed, finding only silence and crumbling concrete. But others return with chilling stories of footsteps that followed them when no one else was there, of wing beats that stirred the air in an empty building, and of glowing red eyes that appeared out of nowhere, watching from the shadows before vanishing into the night. The TNT plant haunting is more than just a legend, it's the heart of the Mothman mystery. Whether it was the birthplace of the creature, its chosen dwelling, or simply the stage for the terror it inspired, the plant remains ground zero for encounters with the unknown. For those who dare to enter, the silence of the ruins is never just silence. It is the breath before something moves, the pause before the wings unfurl, and the moment before those burning eyes pierce through the dark once again. On a cold November night in 1966, the quiet town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, became the stage for one of the most chilling encounters in American folklore. Roger and Linda Scarberry, along with Steve and Mary Millette, had set out for what they thought would be a simple nighttime drive. Their destination was the abandoned TNT plant, an area outside of town filled with rusting buildings, thick woods, and winding roads. It was a popular spot for young people to go when they wanted privacy. But that night, it became something far more sinister. What began as a curious adventure soon spiraled into a nightmare that would follow them for the rest of their lives. As they drove along the road near the plant, the couples noticed something strange in the headlights. Standing on the roadside was a massive, gray figure. At first glance, it seemed like a man, tall, broad, and upright. But as the car drew closer, the details became terrifyingly clear. The creature stood nearly 7 feet tall, with enormous wings folded against its back. Its body was oddly shaped, too wide at the chest, too thin at the waist, as though it was something not meant to exist in nature. But it was the eyes that froze them, in fear, to glowing red orbs, burning like hot coals, locked onto the car. The couple screamed. Roger, behind the wheel, pressed the accelerator, sending the car roaring down the road. They hoped to leave whatever they had seen behind them, but that was when the true nightmare began. With a sudden rush of movement, the creature unfurled its wings and launched itself into the air. The sound was unforgettable, like the snap of canvas mixed with the rush of air from something heavy forcing itself aloft. Within seconds, it was above them, swooping low, its wings casting shadows across the road in the headlights. Roger pushed the car faster, the speedometer climbing past 70, then 80. The couples were shouting over one another, some in panic, some in disbelief. Linda turned in her seat and saw the creature gliding just above the trunk, its eyes glowing in the dark like lanterns. No matter how fast the car went, the monster kept pace with them, swooping down and soaring upward again as if playing a cruel game. At one point, it spread its wings wide, blocking the stars, blotting out the night sky above the road. The couples thought they could lose it by speeding into town. Roger pressed harder on the gas, the engine straining as the car tore down the winding back roads at over 100 miles per hour. But still, the Mothman followed. Sometimes it would disappear into the darkness above them, only to swoop down again with a rush of air that rattled the car's frame. Other times, it stayed so close that the passengers swore they could hear its breathing, heavy and unnatural, like the rasp of some great beast. Steve later said it was unlike anything he had ever seen before. He described its wingspan as wider than the car itself, and its ability to keep up with them at such speeds defied all logic. Mary recalled being certain that it would eventually strike them, tear open the roof, or force them off the road. The glowing eyes, she said, were the worst part, because they didn't just look at them, they looked through them, into them, as though it knew their deepest fears. The couples reached the edge of town, where streetlights glowed faintly against the dark. The creature finally veered off, disappearing into the woods with a final swoop. Roger brought the car screeching to a halt, all four of them trembling, barely able to catch their breath. For a few moments, they sat in stunned silence, the only sound the ticking of the car's cooling engine and the ragged gasps of their breathing. Then, almost as one, they erupted into terrified chatter, recounting what they had seen, what they had felt, and how close they had come to disaster. But the story didn't end there. Convinced they had encountered something unnatural, the group went straight to the local authorities. They reported every detail, from the glowing eyes to the wings, and the way it pursued them relentlessly down the road. The sheriff listened carefully, noting the sincerity in their voices, the genuine terror etched on their faces. None of them had a reputation for lying or exaggerating, and their accounts matched with uncanny precision. Word spread quickly, and the encounter became the talk of Point Pleasant. For many, it was proof that something lurked in the shadows around the TNT plant. Some dismissed it as hysteria or a trick of the night, but others believed the couples wholeheartedly. And as the days went on, more sightings were reported: strange shapes in the sky, glowing eyes in the trees, flapping wings echoing in the night. The Scarberry and Millette pursuit became the cornerstone of the legend. The moment the Mothman truly announced its presence to the world. For the four young people, the memory never faded. Even years later, when they recounted the story, their voices carried the same tremble, the same fear that had gripped them on that long, desperate drive. They had not just seen something, they had been hunted by it. And though they had escaped with their lives, the sense of dread lingered. A reminder that the Mothman was out there, watching, waiting, perhaps choosing its next pursuit. In the days following the first chilling reports of a winged creature in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, the town found itself consumed by rumors and speculation. People whispered about the thing with glowing red eyes, the massive wings that seemed to blot out the stars, and the unsettling sense of dread that accompanied its appearance. Fear was spreading like wildfire, and the local authorities felt the need to calm the growing hysteria. Their explanation was simple and almost dismissive. What everyone had been seeing wasn't a monster at all, it was a bird. More specifically, they pointed to the sandhill crane, a tall, long-necked bird, known to stand nearly as tall as a man, with a wingspan that could stretch 6 feet across. To an ornithologist or a skeptical investigator, the explanation seemed reasonable enough. Sandhill cranes were not typically native to the area, but they could wander from their migratory path, ending up far from where they were usually seen. The officials claimed that the red patches around the crane's eyes could have easily been mistaken for glowing orbs in the darkness, especially by frightened townsfolk unfamiliar with the species. On paper, it sounded like the kind of logical explanation that should have put the matter to rest. But to those who had actually come face to face with the thing, the suggestion bordered on insulting. Linda Scarberry, one of the first witnesses, was adamant. What we saw wasn't any kind of bird. It was bigger than a man, and it followed us, chased our car. Birds don't do that. Her words carried the weight of someone who had seen something that defied reason. For her and others, the bird theory only deepened the mystery, as it seemed like an attempt to brush away their terror with convenient science. Witness after witness rejected the official line. Sandhill cranes were tall, yes, but not impossibly tall. The creature they had seen stood broader and higher, with wings that spread wider than any bird they had known. Its speed was another point of contention. While cranes could fly fast, none could keep pace with a speeding car, pushing over 100 miles per hour. Yet that's what the Scarberries and the Millettes described a pursuit that went on for miles, with the creature swooping, gliding, and darting with uncanny precision. The sound it made wasn't the call of any bird either. Witnesses spoke of low mechanical hums, the rush of giant wings, and sometimes an unsettling silence that pressed against their ears like a physical force. Then there were the eyes. Even skeptics had to admit that this detail was the hardest to explain away. Red eyes that glowed in the dark were not a trait of cranes, owls, or any bird known to inhabit West Virginia. They were more than a reflection of headlights. People described them as burning, piercing through the night, impossible to ignore. Some swore that the eyes themselves instilled fear, that the moment they locked onto the creature's gaze, a primal terror took hold, freezing them in place. No bird could inspire that kind of dread, they insisted. The more the authorities pushed the bird explanation, the more resistance they faced from the townsfolk. Hunters, who knew every species in the region, dismissed the idea outright. If it was a sandhill crane, one hunter reportedly said, "We'd have seen it before, and we'd know it for what it was." Farmers echoed the same, adding that cranes were awkward, almost comical birds in their movement. The creature they saw was not clumsy, it was deliberate, strong, and terrifyingly fast. There was also the strange activity at the old TNT plant, the sprawling munitions site where so many sightings occurred. The creature seemed drawn to that place, appearing again and again among the shadowy buildings and tangled wilderness. Witnesses described metallic clangs in the night, wings echoing through the empty halls, and glowing eyes peering from the shadows. Why would a crane, displaced or not, keep returning to such a place? Why would it stalk cars, chase young couples, and linger in cemeteries? The behavior did not match anything known in nature. Despite all of this, the bird explanation lingered, repeated by newspapers and skeptics as the most rational account of the strange events in Point Pleasant. Some embraced it, not because it fit perfectly, but because it was easier than accepting the alternative that something unexplainable was out there, watching. To admit that a creature like the Mothman might truly exist was to admit that the world was stranger, darker, and more dangerous than they wanted to believe. Still, the bird theory did little to stop the stories. Sightings continued, each one more elaborate, more terrifying than the last. Drivers swore of being pursued. Families spoke of shadowy figures with wings perched on rooftops or trees. Children woke screaming, saying they'd seen the red eyes through their windows. Fear gripped Point Pleasant, and the label of a misplaced crane did nothing to soothe it. Instead, it seemed to highlight a growing divide between official dismissal and the raw terror of the people who lived it. Over time, the Sandhill crane explanation became less of a solution and more of a punchline among believers. To them, it symbolized the refusal of authority to face the unknown. In their eyes, the Mothman was real, and reducing it to nothing more than a bird was an insult to the dozens of witnesses who swore by what they had seen. And so, the legend grew. Whether one believed the officials or the townsfolk, the story of the Mothman was no longer just about a sighting. It was about truth versus denial, fear versus logic, the ordinary versus the unexplainable. To those who believed, the creature was no crane, no bird, no simple mistake of nature. It was something else, something that defied understanding and had chosen Point Pleasant as its hunting ground. In the quiet town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, fear did not only come from the skies, it came knocking at doors, arriving in the form of strangers dressed in immaculate black suits. After the first Mothman encounters began to circulate through the community, many witnesses reported unnerving visits from figures who did not seem to belong. They were tall, thin, and pale, their dark attire making them stand out against the Appalachian backdrop. They asked questions, pried into private matters, and always carried the same chilling message: say nothing. For those already rattled by the appearance of a winged monster, these men in black became an even darker layer to the growing mystery. The first stories emerged only days after the November 1966 sightings. Witnesses who had gone public with their accounts were startled by the sudden arrival of visitors who seemed to know too much. They did not introduce themselves by name or agency, yet they always seemed aware of what had been seen. Some described them as speaking in flat, mechanical tones, as though rehearsed or detached from normal human emotion. Others swore the men's eyes did not look quite right, glassy, unblinking, and reflecting light in unsettling ways, not unlike the glowing red eyes of the creature itself. One of the earliest witnesses, a reporter from a local paper, claimed that two men approached him late at night, pressing him with strange questions. They did not ask for details of the sighting itself, but instead about the people who were spreading the story, almost as if their goal was not to investigate the creature, but to control the narrative. When the reporter pressed back, asking who they worked for, the men smiled, but gave no answer. They then left abruptly, stepping into a car that seemed out of place in the rural towns, leaked dark and unfamiliar to locals. Others described even more unsettling encounters. A family who claimed to have seen Mothman near the TNT plant reported being visited by two men who demanded entry into their home. The men were polite, yet their presence carried a weight of unspoken threat. They asked the family to recount what they had seen over and over, as though testing for inconsistencies. At the end of the interrogation, one of the men reportedly said, in a chilling monotone, "You did not see what you think you saw. Forget it." What made these visitors even more disturbing was the sense that they were not entirely human. One young woman who had reported a sighting later told friends that when she looked closely at one of the men, she noticed his lips were too red, too perfect, almost painted on. His skin was unnaturally pale, almost waxen. He never blinked, and when he did smile, it seemed like a learned gesture, too slow and deliberate to be natural. When she asked a simple question, "Where are you from?" the man froze, as if the concept confused him, before changing the subject entirely. The Men in Black phenomenon spread quickly through Point Pleasant. Those who had encounters described a pattern. An initial sighting of Mothman, followed days later by the arrival of strangers who knew more than they should. Witnesses spoke of receiving strange phone calls with no one on the line, radios turning on by themselves, and even cars breaking down after these visits. Whether the men were government agents, extraterrestrials, or something even stranger, remained uncertain. But one thing was clear: they wanted silence. The connection between the Mothman and these mysterious figures raised disturbing questions. If the creature was simply a large bird, as some authorities suggested, why would federal agents or other unknown operatives go to such lengths to intimidate witnesses? If the sightings were mere hysteria, why did so many people report being followed, harassed, or threatened? Some began to suspect that the Mothman was not just a random anomaly, but part of a larger pattern of events being carefully managed and hidden from the public. Researchers who came to Point Pleasant in the months following the sightings noted the strangeness of these reports. Some believed the men in black were sent to suppress the truth of a cryptid or supernatural entity. Others speculated they were tied to UFO phenomena, since similar figures had been reported in other parts of the country whenever unidentified craft were spotted. To the people of Point Pleasant, though, the explanations mattered less than the fear, the sense that an unseen power was watching, and that telling their story came with a cost. By 1967, as the sightings continued, the men in black stories became almost as frequent as the Mothman encounters themselves. Witnesses described cars that seemed to follow them at night, men who appeared suddenly at diners or gas stations only to vanish moments later, and strangers who knew their names and addresses without explanation. Each story deepened the dread surrounding the Mothman mystery, intertwining the legend of a winged monster with the paranoia of humans, or perhaps inhuman, enforcers of silence. The scarier possibility, whispered by locals, was that the men in black and the Mothman were connected not as enemies, but as parts of the same phenomenon. Perhaps the creature was not just a beast, but a harbinger, tied to forces beyond human comprehension. Perhaps the men were not government agents at all, but guardians or jailers sent to ensure humanity did not peer too deeply into a world it was never meant to see. In the end, the men in black left behind no proof, no names, no records of their visits. They came and went like shadows, adding another layer of mystery to a story already heavy with fear. For the people of Point Pleasant, the warning they carried lingered: stay silent or suffer the consequences. And as the legend of the Mothman grew, so too did the haunting sense that the creature's presence was being controlled, observed, and manipulated by powers that remained hidden in the dark. The Silver Bridge stretched across the Ohio River, connecting Point Pleasant, West Virginia, to Gallipolis, Ohio. For decades, it carried commuters, families, and travelers across the waters. Its steel frame trusted as a lifeline between towns, but in the cold December of 1967, that lifeline became the site of one of the most infamous tragedies in American history and, forever, bound the legend of the Mothman to death and disaster. In the weeks leading up to December 15th, strange reports trickled in from residents who lived near the bridge. Drivers passing in the early morning mist spoke of a shadowy figure perched high on the beams, its glowing red eyes watching silently from the fog. Others claimed to see something flying low over the water, its wings enormous, its presence suffocating. The figure seemed to stalk the bridge, returning night after night, as if waiting for something no one else could foresee. Locals already knew of the Mothman. The town had been buzzing for over a year, with stories of a strange winged creature that chased cars, appeared in cemeteries, and haunted the ruins of the abandoned TNT plant. But the bridge was different. The bridge carried thousands of lives across it daily, and the idea that something so sinister seemed fixated on it filled people with dread. On December 15, 1967, the weather was bone-chilling cold. It was the height of the Christmas shopping season, and the bridge was packed with cars, families heading home, shoppers carrying presents, commuters finishing their day. At approximately 5:04 p.m., as rush hour traffic filled the bridge, disaster struck. With a thunderous crack, the suspension chain on one side of the bridge snapped. The sound echoed across the river like a gunshot, followed by screams and chaos as the steel structure groaned under the weight. Within seconds, the Silver Bridge gave way. Dozens of vehicles were thrown into the icy river below. Steel and concrete twisted violently, sending sparks into the air before the entire span collapsed into the water. 46 lives were lost in the tragedy. Some drowned, trapped in their vehicles. Others were crushed beneath the debris. Survivors recalled the deafening roar of the collapse, the panic of trying to escape freezing water, and the haunting silence afterward. In the days that followed, investigators searched for answers. The official cause, they determined, was a critical failure in a single eye-bar link in the suspension chain, an unnoticed defect that caused the entire bridge to fail under stress. It was, by all scientific accounts, a tragic accident of engineering. But for the people of Point Pleasant, the explanation didn't erase the dread. Too many had seen the creature before it happened. Too many had warned that something wasn't right. Witnesses swore they had seen the Mothman on the bridge in the days leading up to the collapse. Some even claimed it had been perched on the highest beam the very morning of the tragedy, red eyes glowing against the gray sky. Others described a shadow passing over the water, as if the creature itself had taken flight just before the steel gave way. The sightings stopped almost entirely after the collapse, as if the creature had vanished once its grim task was complete. This eerie timing gave rise to chilling questions. Was the Mothman a harbinger of doom, warning the town of the impending catastrophe? Or was it somehow tied to the tragedy itself, a supernatural agent that brought disaster wherever it appeared? To those who had seen it, the answer seemed clear. The Mothman's presence was no coincidence. Families of the victims mourned, yet even among the sorrow, whispers persisted that the Mothman had been trying to tell them something. Some said it wasn't a monster at all, but a prophetic being, cursed to watch over humanity's darkest moments. Others rejected this, believing instead that its arrival spelled only death, a curse that could not be avoided. The Silver Bridge collapse forever cemented the Mothman in the lore of Point Pleasant. Newspapers across the nation reported on the tragedy, and the connection to the mysterious creature spread beyond West Virginia, capturing the imagination of people across the world. Suddenly, the Mothman was no longer just a local legend. It became a symbol of disaster, a dark omen whispered about whenever catastrophe loomed. For the people of Point Pleasant, the memory of that night has never faded. Survivors and families still recall the horror of watching the bridge fall, the haunting glow of headlights sinking into the water, and the eerie knowledge that many had seen the creature beforehand. Even now, decades later, the legend of the Mothman lingers like a shadow over the river. Whether it was a curse, a warning, or something far stranger, the Silver Bridge collapse ensured that the Mothman would never be forgotten. The creature had stepped out of myth and into tragedy. Its crimson eyes burned into the memory of a town forever changed. And though the bridge has long since been rebuilt, every December, when the cold fog drifts over the Ohio River, some say they still look up to the steel beams, half expecting to see it there, again watching, waiting, and reminding them that sometimes legends and death walk hand in hand. They call it the harbinger of doom, a creature that seems to drift between the cracks of time and catastrophe. To many, it is just folklore born out of fear. But to those who claim to have seen it with their own eyes, the Mothman is no mere legend. It is a shadow that appears when the world is on the edge of disaster. Its arrival, always sudden and unexplainable, feels less like coincidence and more like a warning etched into the very fabric of human tragedy. The earliest stories connected to this theory go beyond the quiet hills of West Virginia. In the years following the Silver Bridge collapse, researchers and storytellers uncovered accounts that placed Mothman or something strikingly similar in other corners of the globe. The descriptions remain unnervingly consistent. A massive winged figure, human-shaped but not human at all, with burning red eyes that shine like twin beacons in the night. Witnesses often describe not just the sight of it, but a feeling that comes with it, a dreadful, suffocating sense that something terrible is about to happen. In 1986, one of the world's worst nuclear disasters struck the Soviet Union. The Chernobyl nuclear power plant exploded, releasing radiation that poisoned the land, the water, and countless lives. In the days leading up to the catastrophe, several workers and residents reported a strange winged figure circling the power plant. Some said it hovered near the tall smokestacks, its eyes glowing even in daylight. Others spoke of terrifying dreams of a black bird-like creature and phone calls filled with eerie, metallic sounds. At first, These claims seemed like rumors, but after the explosion, survivors swore the creature had been their silent sentinel before the disaster. Years later, thousands of miles away, Japan would experience its own nuclear nightmare. On March 11, 2011, after an earthquake and tsunami devastated the coast, the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant suffered meltdowns that shocked the world. In the weeks before, locals had whispered about something strange in the skies. A few fishermen claimed to see a figure hovering over the crashing waves, wings stretched wide as if to blot out the sun. Others reported glowing red eyes staring from the shoreline at dusk, vanishing the moment anyone tried to approach. After the plant failed, some began connecting these stories, pointing out that once again, the shadowy figure of the Mothman seemed to have appeared before calamity. Even the United States has its echoes of this phenomenon beyond Point Pleasant. Some witnesses claim that in the weeks before September 11, 2001, sightings of a winged creature near New York City were whispered among construction workers and commuters. One story told of a man who saw a huge bird-like being perched atop a bridge not far from Manhattan, glowing eyes cutting through the haze of the early morning. At the time, he dismissed it as imagination, but after the towers fell, the memory returned with chilling clarity. These scattered accounts across decades and continents have fueled the harbinger of doom theory, the belief that the Mothman is drawn to tragedy. But the question remains, why does it appear? Is it here to warn or to witness? Some believe it is a guardian, its presence a last chance for humanity to recognize danger before it strikes. Others argue it is a creature of ill omen, a parasite feeding on fear and sorrow, showing itself only when destruction is inevitable. Skeptics dismiss the accounts as mass hysteria or the human mind as desperate attempt to find patterns in chaos. They argue that disaster breeds superstition, and the Mothman is just a symbol created by frightened people searching for meaning in tragedy. After all, shadows and birds can be mistaken for monsters when panic sets in. But for those who have seen the glowing red eyes and felt the dread that comes with them, no explanation can erase what they experienced. What makes the harbinger of doom theory especially unsettling is its universality. Unlike many local legends tied to a single place or culture, the Mothman has no borders. It crosses oceans, languages, and generations, attaching itself to the darkest chapters of human history. That consistency raises a terrifying possibility that the creature is real, and it is not bound by geography. It may exist in a space beyond our understanding, appearing when fate tips toward catastrophe, whether nuclear disaster, structural collapse, or unimaginable attack. There are those who have tried to study it more closely, gathering witness reports, timelines, and sightings in an attempt to piece together its purpose. Some claim to see patterns, clusters of appearances in industrial areas, around bridges, or near places where human technology pushes the limits of safety. Others insist the pattern is not physical but emotional, that Mothman is drawn to places of collective dread, moments when fear and tension hum in the air before the breaking point. And yet, for all the theories, Mothman never stays long. It does not linger after tragedy. Once disaster strikes, the sightings stop, leaving only ashes and grief in its wake. It comes like a shadow before the storm and disappears as soon as the damage is done, as if its role has been fulfilled. Whether it warns or curses, or simply observes, no one can say. What is undeniable is the power of the legend. From Point Pleasant to Chernobyl, Fukushima, and beyond, stories of the winged harbinger continue to emerge, refusing to fade with time. Each new disaster seems to bring whispers of red eyes in the dark, a massive figure on the horizon, and the feeling that humanity is never truly alone in its moments of greatest despair. Ohio, like its neighbor West Virginia, has its own share of strange folklore. By the 1970s, the legend of the Mothman had already been firmly rooted in the town of Point Pleasant, with tales of glowing red eyes, great wings, and ominous appearances tied to tragedy. But as the years passed, whispers began to circulate across the state line. Strange winged beings were being reported not just in Point Pleasant, but throughout Ohio, creatures described in chillingly similar detail to the infamous Mothman. For residents of the Buckeye State, the legend seemed to have crossed a river, spreading its dark wings over new territory. One of the earliest reports came from the highways that cut through the Ohio River Valley. Drivers spoke of late-night encounters along stretches of nearly empty road, where their headlights would suddenly catch something perched along the side. On more than one occasion, it wasn't a deer or stray animal, but something far more unsettling: large, crouched figures with folded wings. Motorists would describe slowing down, only for the creature to unfurl its massive wings and launch into the night air, keeping pace with their cars before disappearing into the trees. The details carried a haunting consistency: glowing red eyes, a humanoid body cloaked in darkness, and wings that spanned wider than any bird native to the region. Highway encounters were unsettling enough, but some witnesses claimed the winged being seemed to prefer vantage points where it could watch without being noticed. One Ohio truck driver swore he saw the figure perched atop a billboard along a rural road near Gallipolis, its glowing eyes reflecting the beams of his headlights. For several seconds, it remained completely still, crouched like some enormous predator surveying the traffic below. Then, with a sudden flap of wings, it vanished into the black sky. The man would later admit that he refused to drive that stretch of road at night again, unnerved by the thought that something could be watching from above, hidden in plain sight. Near rivers, the sightings became even more intense. Fishermen along the Ohio River reported hearing flapping sounds that did not resemble the wings of any ordinary bird. Some described the noise as mechanical, like the beating of heavy, leathery sails against the air. A few even told of sudden ripples in the water, as if something massive had flown overhead, disturbing the stillness of the river surface. One young couple recalled parking along the banks late one evening when their car began to rock gently. At first they thought it was the wind, until a dark shadow passed directly over them, blotting out the moonlight. The figure soared across the river with a speed that seemed impossible, before disappearing into the tree line. For many Ohio residents, these encounters weren't isolated. Stories traveled through communities like wildfire, passed along from neighbors and coworkers. Farmers claimed to see the creatures circling their barns, while teenagers returning from late-night drives spoke in hushed tones of being chased down rural roads by something with glowing eyes. At times, skeptics suggested it was nothing more than large birds like owls or herons startled in the dark. But those who had seen it were adamant no bird could move like what they had encountered, nor give off the eerie sense of being followed or hunted. The reports often carried an additional layer of unease, the sense that the creature's appearance was a sign of something worse to come. Just as the people of Point Pleasant had tied the Mothman to the Silver Bridge collapse, Ohioans began to wonder whether their sightings carried similar weight. Industrial accidents, car crashes, and local tragedies became linked, at least in local folklore, to the sightings of the winged entity. Some even whispered that the being perched on billboards and bridges not merely to watch traffic, but to mark the sites of future disaster. Psychologists and folklorists argued that these sightings were the natural spread of an already powerful legend. The Mothman had become a cultural shadow, and once it entered the public consciousness, it was destined to reappear in other forms, other places. But those who stood on highways late at night, or walked along the river's edge, when the sky seemed just a little too dark, told a different story. To them, it wasn't imagination, it was real. Something vast, winged, and unnatural was following them through the Ohio night. One particularly chilling report came from a family traveling near the city of Portsmouth. Driving home after visiting relatives, they spotted something flying parallel to their car, just above the tree line. At first, they thought it was a plane, but it dipped and swayed with unnatural agility when it suddenly swooped down, coming within feet of their vehicle. The mother in the passenger seat screamed as two glowing red eyes locked onto her. The figure vanished as suddenly as it appeared. But the family's children claimed to have nightmares for weeks afterward, dreaming of being carried away by enormous wings. By the late 1970s, the Ohio encounters became part of the growing Mothman mythos. Books, articles, and even radio programs debated the nature of the sightings. Were they migratory birds mistaken for something more sinister? Or was this truly the same entity that had haunted Point Pleasant a decade earlier? now extending its territory into the heart of Ohio. Some believe the sightings were proof that the Mothman was not tied to a single location, but was a roving entity, drawn to places of tension, fear, and potential disaster. Even today, whispers of winged creatures persist in the Ohio River Valley. Locals claim the legend has never died, only adapted, waiting for its next witness. Drivers still glance at billboards when the headlights hit them at night, half expecting to see glowing red eyes staring back. Along the rivers, fishermen look skyward when they hear an unnatural flap of wings. And on the highways, when cars race through the dark with no one else around, there is always that lingering feeling, what if something is flying just out of sight, waiting, watching, and choosing its next moment to reveal itself? Between 2017 and 2018, a strange and unsettling phenomenon emerged over the city of Chicago. Residents began reporting sightings of a massive, winged humanoid that seemed to appear out of nowhere, often near the edges of Lake Michigan and in the skies above O'Hare Airport. The accounts were eerily consistent. The creature was tall, impossibly slender, with enormous dark wings that stretched wider than any human could hope to span. Its eyes glowed red, piercing through the night like twin beacons, leaving witnesses frozen in shock and fear. The report sparked questions almost immediately. Was this a local cryptid, a hoax, or something far more sinister migrating from the East Coast? The first sightings came in the summer of 2017. Commuters, returning from late shifts at the airport, spoke of seeing a shadow pass overhead as planes landed and took off. One airport employee claimed to witness the figure perched atop a cargo building, its wings folded neatly as it surveyed the tarmac below. It wasn't a bird, he insisted. It didn't move like anything I've ever seen, and those eyes, they were like fire. I swear it was looking right at me. Soon, social media began buzzing with similar accounts, many of them from people who had never met and yet described the creature in almost identical terms. Lake Michigan became another hotspot. Joggers and evening strollers along the lakeshore reported a presence in the sky just after dusk. The figure would swoop low, sometimes following them along the paths, before disappearing behind the silhouette of the city or vanishing over the water. Some described a sense of being watched even when the creature was gone, as if the air itself carried the weight of its gaze. Many witnesses reported feeling a deep, primal fear, a sensation that something unnatural had entered their world. News outlets initially treated the reports as amusing or sensationalist, attributing them to hoaxes, drones, or mistaken identity. Large birds like cranes or owls were suggested, but these explanations failed to account for the sheer size of the creature or its unnerving intelligence, as described by so many eyewitnesses. Some witnesses swore it moved deliberately, almost as if it were stalking them, not merely flying aimlessly. Others said it seemed to vanish into thin air, disappearing in a way no known animal could achieve. The frequency of sightings made skeptics uneasy. People began to notice a pattern. The figure was most often reported in areas where large groups congregated near airports, stadiums, or popular lakeside paths. In each case, witnesses described a sudden, almost surreal appearance, followed by an instantaneous disappearance. Some theorized that the creature's presence was linked to human activity, perhaps drawn to energy, noise, or even fear itself. Others whispered that this could be the same entity long associated with Point Pleasant, West Virginia, traveling hundreds of miles to make itself known in the heart of the Midwest. Eyewitness accounts became more detailed over time. One man walking his dog near Lincoln Park recalled a moment when the creature hovered just above the tree line, wings beating slowly, eyes glowing red. "It was watching me," he said. "I couldn't move. It wasn't aggressive, not really, but it was aware. And then it was gone. Just like that. Vanished into the night." Another report came from a couple driving along Lakeshore Drive, who described a shadow passing over their car, blocking the moonlight. The red eyes lingered in their memory long after the figure disappeared, leaving a lingering sense of unease. The Chicago wave sparked debates among paranormal researchers and cryptozoologists. Was this truly Mothman, the harbinger of disaster known in Point Pleasant? making its way across the country? Or was it an entirely new phenomenon, inspired by the old legend but manifesting in a modern urban environment? Researchers noted the similarities to past sightings: the glowing red eyes, the immense wingspan, the uncanny intelligence, and the sudden disappearance. Yet the urban setting of Chicago, with its skyscrapers and sprawling airport, gave these sightings a new and unsettling dimension. Unlike the rural woods of West Virginia, this creature was now navigating human-dominated landscapes, appearing amidst steel, glass, and concrete. The timing of the sightings added another layer of mystery. They coincided with reports of unexplained technical malfunctions at O'Hare and power outages along the lakeshore. Though no direct connection was ever proven, some theorists suggested the creature's presence might be linked to impending events or disasters, echoing the prophetic associations from the Mothman's earlier history. Others feared that these sightings were a warning, signaling that the same shadowy forces that had haunted West Virginia might now be active in the Midwest. Despite extensive efforts, no photographic evidence could capture the Chicago figure clearly. Blurry cell phone images and video clips circulated online, but none provided proof beyond personal testimony. The witnesses' consistency, however, made it difficult to dismiss the reports entirely. Each description reinforced the sense that something anomalous, something deliberately observing human activity, was present in the city's skies. By early 2018, the sightings slowed as suddenly as they had begun. Many speculated that the creature had moved on, leaving Chicago behind. Others feared it was merely biding its time, appearing only when it had a specific purpose or when disaster loomed. For residents who had witnessed it, the memory remained vivid: the feeling of being watched, the red eyes in the night, and the impossible wings that cut through the sky like darkness made tangible. The Chicago wave left a lasting impression. Whether it was the Mothman continuing its enigmatic journey from Point Pleasant or an entirely new manifestation of a global phenomenon, its appearances reminded the city that the unknown can slip quietly into our lives. Those who saw it would never forget the sense of foreboding, the unearthly intelligence in its gaze, and the knowledge that some legends refuse to be confined by geography. In the end, the creature vanished, but its shadow lingered over Lake Michigan and O'Hare Airport. Residents learned to glance at the night sky with caution, wondering if, somewhere above, the winged figure might still be circling, watching, and waiting for the next moment to emerge. The Chicago wave had proven one thing: the Mothman, or whatever it truly was, could travel, adapt, and haunt the modern world as relentlessly as it haunted the rural roads of West Virginia decades earlier. The Ohio River has always carried with it a sense of mystery. Stretching nearly 1,000 miles, its waters wind past cities and forests, industrial yards, and forgotten stretches of wilderness. It has witnessed centuries of commerce, tragedy, and folklore. Yet among all the stories told along its banks, one of the most chilling is that of the Ohio River Guardian, a figure some believe to be kin to the legendary Mothman. Unlike the Point Pleasant sightings of the 1960s, this entity is said to be born of the river itself, a spirit rising from the dark waters. For decades, fishermen and river workers have reported strange phenomena just after sunset. Some speak of glowing red eyes hovering a few feet above the surface of the water, moving against the current, as if watching from beneath an unseen body. Others claim to have seen enormous shadows gliding just beneath the waves, never breaking the surface, but leaving ripples that linger unnaturally long. Older generations along the riverbanks tell of a curse tied to the Ohio. Stories say that, when the river swells after storms, spirits awaken in its depths. Some whisper that the guardian is not a protector at all, but a harbinger, appearing before drownings, boating accidents, or floods. Others argue that it is a true sentinel, a spirit warning people away from danger. Both interpretations feed into the same chilling truth: the guardian only shows itself when something terrible is near. In the late 1970s, a barge operator near Louisville reported seeing something extraordinary. While navigating at night, he noticed two crimson lights on the water ahead. Believing it was another vessel, he slowed his barge, preparing to signal. But as he drew closer, the lights rose upward, revealing themselves as eyes. They hovered for several seconds before vanishing into the mist. Minutes later, his radio crackled with news of a small fishing boat capsizing upriver. The operator later insisted that the eyes had not been lights from a boat, but something alive, something watching. Other stories echo this strange connection between sightings and tragedy. In 1993, a group of teenagers swimming near Wheeling claimed to see a massive winged silhouette perched on the opposite bank. They swam back in a panic, abandoning their clothes and towels. That same evening, the river claimed the life of another local boy caught in the undertow a few miles downstream. To those who believe, the guardian appeared not to frighten the teens, but to warn them away before the river made its claim. What fascinates researchers of folklore is the recurring similarity to the Mothman of Point Pleasant, West Virginia. That creature, with its red eyes and wings, was famously connected to the collapse of the Silver Bridge in 1967, a disaster that killed dozens. Some believe the Mothman is not a single entity but a manifestation tied to rivers and tragedies. By this interpretation, the Ohio River Guardian is simply another form of the same spirit, moving up and down the river system as catastrophe looms. Skeptics dismiss the stories as exaggerations born from fear and imagination. Glowing eyes may be nothing more than reflections of headlights on the water. Shadows could be the forms of large fish, or tricks of moonlight and current. The river's misty banks lend themselves to illusions, and tired minds often make patterns from the unknown. Yet what troubles skeptics is the sheer number of consistent reports. Stretching over decades and across multiple states along the Ohio River, too many stories align too closely for coincidence to fully explain them away. One of the eeriest accounts came from a fisherman near Evansville, Indiana. He claimed he was casting his line at dawn when the water grew unnaturally still, as if the river itself had paused. Then, slowly, two eyes appeared beneath the surface, glowing faintly but unmistakably. He froze, certain it was some trick of light, until the eyes blinked. Panicked, he stumbled backward and dropped his gear. By the time he gathered the courage to look again, the river was moving normally, the eyes gone. Later that week, heavy rains led to severe flooding in the area. To the fishermen, the Guardian had shown itself as a grim messenger. Legends now describe the Guardian in many forms. Some call it a winged humanoid with enormous black wings and eyes like burning coals. Others insist it is more aquatic, a shadowy figure that can glide beneath the water like a massive ray or serpent, only rising when danger approaches. A few even claim to have heard it. A low, mournful hum carried on the wind, like a horn or chant, just before the river claimed another victim. The Ohio River has always been dangerous. Its currents shift unexpectedly, its undertows pull without mercy, and its floods have devastated entire communities. It has swallowed ships, lives, and histories. Perhaps it is fitting that such a river would inspire a guardian or a monster born of its waters. For those who spend their lives near it, the story of the Guardian is more than just folklore. It is a reminder that the river is alive, watching, and perhaps warning. Whether protector or omen, the Ohio River Guardian remains one of the region's most enduring mysteries. Its red eyes continue to haunt the memories of those who claim to have seen them, glowing faintly above the dark waters before vanishing without a trace. And so the legend persists, carried on the current like a whisper through the night, a reminder that some shadows never leave the river's edge. The legend of the Mothman has grown into one of the most unsettling pieces of American folklore. Sightings of the winged humanoid are often paired with another phenomenon, something equally unnerving: the cries that echo through the night. Witnesses describe them as high-pitched screeches, not quite animal and not quite human, that rise and fall like a banshee's wail. Some say the sound resembles metal scraping against metal, drawn out and grating, like the scream of a train dragging its wheels across rusted tracks. The noises linger unnaturally in the air. For many, these screams are the first sign that the Mothman is near. Reports of these cries stretch back to the earliest accounts from Point Pleasant, West Virginia, in the mid-1960s. Several locals, who never claimed to see the creature itself, nonetheless admitted to hearing a piercing shriek in the night. Hunters out in the woods described dropping their rifles at the sound, convinced no earthly predator could produce such a noise. Drivers along the back roads near the old TNT area recounted slamming their brakes when the sound split the night sky, their headlights catching nothing but trees and shadows. To them, the shrieks felt less like a call and more like a warning, vibrating deep into their bones. In November of 1966, when two young couples first reported seeing the Mothman near the abandoned munitions plant, they mentioned the creature pursuing their car down Highway 62. What most people remember from the tale is the red-eyed figure keeping pace with them at over 100 miles per hour. But what often goes overlooked is their claim that the air was filled with a piercing sound, like a shrill mechanical scream, as the creature swooped overhead. It rattled their ears and echoed even after the shadow had vanished into the sky. Similar reports followed for weeks. Families lying awake at night claimed to hear the cries outside their windows. One woman remembered hearing the shriek on a December night, only to wake the next morning to news of a car accident that had claimed the lives of two men she knew. To her, the sound was not just a cry of the unknown, it was an omen. Over the years, these reports spread beyond West Virginia. Sightings of winged figures in other parts of the country, and even abroad, were accompanied by similar sounds. In Chicago, between 2017 and 2018, dozens of witnesses claimed to see a humanoid with dark wings near O'Hare Airport and along Lake Michigan. Alongside these sightings came reports of high-pitched screeches that cut through the city noise. A security guard recalled hearing a cry so sharp it made him drop his flashlight. Though, when he looked around the parking lot, there was nothing there. Another man walking his dog along the shoreline swore that both he and his pet froze when the sound rang out above the waves. Though the night was empty, explanations for the cries vary, but none are entirely comforting. Some suggest it is an adaptation, a hunting mechanism, or a form of communication between creatures of the same kind. If the Mothman is flesh and blood, the sound may serve the same purpose as the calls of nocturnal predators. Others take a darker view. They argue that the cries are supernatural, more akin to the banshee's wail in Celtic folklore, a sound tied not to life, but to death. In those tales, a banshee's scream heralds tragedy, and those who hear it are marked by misfortune. Many witnesses of the Mothman's cry feel the same dread that the sound is not of this world, and that to hear it is to be cursed. Skeptics argue that the noises could be mistaken for natural ones. Owls, especially the barred owl, produce chilling calls that sometimes resemble human screams. The red-tailed hawk is known for its piercing cry, often mistaken for something more sinister. Foxes in the night can sound like a child's scream, and coyotes have been known to produce bone-chilling howls that reverberate across fields and forests. To those who do not know the wildlife intimately, such sounds could be distorted into something otherworldly. Yet believers counter that no animal cry lasts as long or feels as unnatural as the Mothman's screech, and that too many experienced hunters and outdoorsmen have dismissed those explanations after hearing it for themselves. One of the most unsettling elements of these cries is how they affect the body. Witnesses often describe a physical reaction, ears ringing, skin crawling, and a pressure in the chest, as though the sound reverberates inside rather than outside. Some compare it to standing too close to a train as it roars past, the vibration seeping into bone. Others say it feels like the sound is alive, worming its way into their thoughts, leaving them unable to sleep for days afterward. The Silver Bridge collapse of December 1967, the tragedy most closely tied to the Mothman legend, is also linked to the cries. Survivors and witnesses later claimed that in the days before the disaster, eerie noises echoed across the riverbanks at night. Though there was no definitive connection, many came to believe that the creature's screams were a warning, a desperate cry against the impending catastrophe. After the bridge fell, taking 46 lives, those who remembered the sounds could never shake the idea that they had heard the last warning before disaster struck. Today, the cries continue to be part of modern sightings. Paranormal investigators visiting hotspots often record unexplained audio high-pitched screeches without a visible source. Some clips sound like mechanical grinding, others like tortured wails, yet all share the same unsettling quality. A sound out of place, unnatural, impossible to ignore. Whether the cries belong to an undiscovered species, a supernatural entity, or simply the imagination of frightened minds, one fact remains: those who hear them never forget. The noise embeds itself in memory like a scar, a reminder of something vast, alien, and unexplainable lingering in the night. For many, the sight of glowing red eyes is terrifying enough. But for others, it is the unseen, the cries that echo through the darkness long after silence returns, that haunt them most. The story of the Frick family remains one of the most chilling tales linked to the Mothman legend. Unlike fleeting sightings on lonely highways or the occasional eerie sound in the woods, the Frick family claimed to live under the direct attention of the winged figure for weeks. To them, it was not simply an urban legend or a strange shadow in the night. It was a real and terrifying presence that stalked them until tragedy struck. The family lived in a modest home on the outskirts of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, not far from the old TNT area where many of the earliest Mothman sightings occurred in the late 1960s. At first, the disturbances were small. The children would complain about tapping on their bedroom windows late at night. Their parents dismissed it as tree branches scraping in the wind or animals brushing against the glass. But as the nights went on, the tapping grew louder, sharper, and more insistent, as though long fingers were deliberately rapping against the panes. It wasn't long before the entire family began to notice shadows circling their property. Dark shapes would drift across the yard, always just out of reach of the porch light. At times, the shadows seemed to spread across the house itself, blotting out moonlight through the windows. Neighbors who came to visit remarked on the unsettling feeling of being watched the moment they stepped onto the property. The Fricks themselves described an oppressive atmosphere, as though the air around their home had thickened. One of the sons, restless from the sleepless nights, claimed he saw it first. He awoke to find a tall, winged silhouette standing just outside his window, its eyes glowing red in the darkness. He froze, unable to scream, until the figure tilted its head slightly and then vanished into the trees with a single beat of enormous wings. When he finally told his parents, his mother admitted she, too, had glimpsed the figure in the yard. They no longer doubted that something was haunting them. The nights that followed grew worse. The tapping returned, now accompanied by scratching sounds along the siding of the house. Sometimes the roof creaked under what sounded like heavy footsteps pacing back and forth. The family dog refused to go outside after sunset, whining and clawing at the door to be let back in. On more than one occasion, the entire family was startled awake by high-pitched screeches that seemed to come from directly above their house. A sound like metal tearing against metal, so loud it rattled the glass in their windows. The Fricks reached out to friends and church members, seeking advice. Some told them to pray, others to bless the home. A few suggested that the creature might be tied to death, warning them of something to come. This thought terrified them, but they could not shake the feeling that they had been chosen for some reason, singled out by the dark figure that lingered in their yard. Then came the accident. One evening, the father of the family was driving home from work when his truck veered off the road and struck a tree. The impact killed him instantly. Authorities labeled it a freak accident, likely the result of fatigue or a sudden loss of control. But to the Frick family, there was no question what had happened. For weeks they had been tormented by the presence of the Mothman, and now, in the wake of his death, the visitations abruptly ceased. The children would later say that the house felt different after their father's death, lighter, quieter, almost as if a storm had passed. The tapping on the windows never returned. The screeches in the night fell silent. No one ever again saw the red eyes in the yard. It was as though the Mothman had completed its grim task and moved on, leaving the family to grapple with their grief and the terrible knowledge that they had been warned in a way no one else could understand. News of the Frick family's ordeal spread quickly through the small community. Some whispered that the father's death had been unavoidable, destined to happen. and that the Mothman had only been there to mark the event. Others believed the creature was trying to prevent the tragedy, its haunting presence a desperate attempt to alert the family of what was to come. Still others thought the family had simply been cursed, chosen at random, to experience the terror of the unknown. Folklorists studying the case point out that stories like the Fricks are consistent with the Mothman's reputation as a harbinger of disaster. From the Silver Bridge collapse to more recent reported sightings before tragedies, the creature has become linked to events of death and destruction. The Fricks story fits neatly into this pattern. Weeks of disturbances, growing terror, and finally, a sudden and devastating loss. Yet what makes their account so haunting is the intimacy of it. Unlike public disasters witnessed by many, this was a private nightmare, confined to a single family. Their nights were filled with terror that only they could see and hear. Their tragedy unfolded not in the collapse of a bridge or a flood, but in the death of a husband and father on a lonely road. And for them, the line between coincidence and omen was erased the moment the creature's visit stopped. To this day, descendants of the Frick family still live in the area, though most avoid discussing what happened. Some refuse to speak of the Mothman at all, believing that mentioning it could draw its attention once more. Others quietly admit that they believe the stories, that the red-eyed shadow their relatives described was real, and that it carried with it the weight of death. The tragedy of the Frick family serves as one of the most personal and unsettling pieces of the Mothman lore. It is a reminder that folklore is not always born from distant legends or anonymous reports. Sometimes it takes root in the lives of ordinary families, twisting their grief into something larger than life, something that resonates with every whispered story along the Ohio River Valley. And whether the Mothman was a warning, a curse, or simply a shadow misunderstood, the Fricks lived and suffered under its gaze, leaving behind a tale that still unsettles anyone who hears it. In 1975, a book was published that would cement the Mothman as one of America's most enduring paranormal legends. John Akeel, a journalist and UFO researcher, released The Mothman Prophecies, a chilling account that pulled together the strange events surrounding Point Pleasant, West Virginia, in the mid-1960s. While the creature itself, the winged humanoid with glowing red eyes, was frightening enough, Keel's book wove the sightings into a much larger tapestry of unexplained phenomena: UFO encounters, strange phone calls, men in black visitations, prophetic dreams, and psychic disturbances. What might have been dismissed as a local oddity became, in Keel's hands, the foundation for a story of cosmic mystery and impending disaster. Keel's involvement began in 1966, when reports first surfaced of a strange winged figure haunting the abandoned TNT area near Point Pleasant. Couples driving at night claimed to be chased by a massive creature with glowing eyes, able to keep pace with their car even at highway speeds. Others described seeing it perched on rooftops or gliding silently over fields. Intrigued, Keel traveled to Point Pleasant to investigate. What he found was not just a monster story, but a community caught in the grip of something much stranger. During his research, Keel interviewed dozens of witnesses who described not only the Mothman, but also strange lights in the sky. UFO sightings were frequent in the Ohio Valley at the time, and many locals who encountered the creature also reported unexplained aerial phenomena. People claimed to see glowing orbs darting across the night, strange craft hovering silently, and beams of light cutting through the fog. Keel began to suspect that the Mothman was not an isolated apparition, but part of a larger pattern of paranormal activity. What disturbed him even more were the accounts of the so-called men in black. Several witnesses claimed to be visited by strange individuals in dark suits, who warned them to remain silent about their experiences. These men spoke in odd, stilted voices, drove outdated or unmarked cars, and seemed unfamiliar with everyday human behavior. Some locals described them as foreign or otherworldly, with pale complexions and mechanical mannerisms. For Keel, these encounters suggested an organized effort to control or obscure the truth about what was happening in Point Pleasant. As he spent more time in the town, Keel himself began to experience unsettling phenomena. He reported receiving bizarre phone calls from distorted voices, some of which seemed to predict future events. At times, his phone would ring with no one on the other end, or with mechanical tones and garbled speech. He described losing track of time, experiencing strange coincidences, and being plagued by a sense that he was being watched. To Keel, it seemed that the very act of investigating the Mothman had drawn him into a web of psychic manipulation. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the Mothman prophecies was Keel's suggestion that the events in Point Pleasant were building toward catastrophe. He recorded accounts of residents who experienced prophetic dreams or visions of tragedy. Some described nightmares of people drowning, others of bridges collapsing or disasters striking the town. Keel himself felt that an ominous force was at work, guiding events toward a grim conclusion. His fears proved devastatingly accurate on December 15, 1967, when the Silver Bridge, which connected Point Pleasant to Ohio, suddenly collapsed. 46 people lost their lives in the disaster. For many, the timing was impossible to ignore. The strange sightings and eerie phenomena that had plagued the area for over a year seemed to culminate in tragedy. After the collapse, reports of the Mothman abruptly declined. Keel interpreted this as evidence that the creature had been a harbinger. Its appearances linked not just to local strangeness, but to a warning of death and disaster. In his book, he suggested that the Mothman and the surrounding phenomena represented something beyond human comprehension. Forces that existed on the edge of reality, occasionally bleeding into our world with terrifying consequences. When the Mothman Prophecies was published, it quickly became the definitive account of the legend. Keel's writing style, blending investigative journalism with eerie narrative detail, gave the book the tone of both a documentary and a horror story. Skeptics criticized it for blurring the line between fact and speculation, while believers embraced it as one of the most complete examinations of high strangeness ever written. What set the book apart was not simply its catalog of sightings, but the way it tied disparate elements together: monsters, UFOs, psychic visions, government secrecy, and the fragility of human destiny. The book's influence extended far beyond Point Pleasant. It inspired paranormal researchers to look for connections between seemingly unrelated phenomena, coining the term window areas for places where multiple types of strangeness occur simultaneously. Keel's work suggested that UFOs, cryptids, and psychic events might all be manifestations of a single underlying phenomenon, something that slips through the cracks of our understanding, taking different shapes but always hinting at the same greater mystery. In the years since its publication, the Mothman Prophecies has achieved near-mythic status. It has been reprinted many times, inspiring documentaries, scholarly debates, and even a 2002 film adaptation starring Richard Gere. While the movie took creative liberties, it introduced a new generation to the story of Point Pleasant and solidified the Mothman as a cultural icon. Festivals, museums, and countless works of fiction now celebrate the creature, but almost all trace their inspiration back to Keel's book. Critics still debate whether Keel was a brilliant investigator uncovering a hidden reality, or a man overwhelmed by his own obsession with the unknown. His detractors point to exaggerations and inconsistencies in his accounts, while his supporters argue that the strange and confusing nature of the phenomena defies conventional reporting. Regardless, few deny that he captured something profound: the fear, wonder, and uncanny atmosphere that gripped Point Pleasant during those fateful years. Today, the Mothman Prophecies remains the central text for anyone seeking to understand the legend. It is more than a chronicle of sightings. It is a portrait of a community caught in a web of unexplained events, a reflection on the limits of human knowledge, and a chilling reminder that the world may hold forces beyond our comprehension. For those who read it, the book continues to whisper the same unsettling message John Keel left behind: that sometimes the universe speaks in omens, and whether we listen or not, the outcome may already be written. In 2002, The legend of the Mothman leaped from the pages of folklore and paranormal research into mainstream cinema with the release of The Mothman Prophecies. Starring Richard Gere and Laura Linney, the film was loosely based on John Keel's 1975 book of the same name, which chronicled the strange events in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, during the 1960s. While Keel's book had already established the creature as a subject of fascination among paranormal enthusiasts, the movie brought the story to an international audience, turning the red-eyed figure into a pop culture phenomenon. What had once been a local legend tied to a small river town suddenly became a global icon of mystery and fear. The movie followed Gere as a reporter drawn into the mystery of the Mothman. After his wife experiences strange visions before her death, the narrative blended the creature's legend with psychic phenomena, unexplained phone calls, and a looming sense of dread that culminates in the dramatic collapse of a Bridget clear nod to the real-life Silver Bridge disaster of 1967. While it took creative liberties with Keel's account, the film captured the eerie atmosphere that made the original story so unsettling. Its visuals of shadowy winged figures, glowing red eyes in the dark, and the bone-chilling sound design of unearthly screeches left a deep impression on audiences. Critics were divided. Some praised the film's moody, atmospheric style, while others found its ambiguity frustrating. Yet the lack of clear answers was precisely what made the story resonate. The Mothman was not presented as a simple monster or villain, but as an enigmatic force, something beyond human comprehension, neither fully evil nor entirely benevolent. The film left viewers unsettled, haunted by the idea that unseen forces might shape human destiny. This ambiguity mirrored the fear that had gripped Point Pleasant decades earlier, reminding audiences that the unknown is often more frightening than any concrete explanation. Following the film's release, interest in the Mothman exploded. Point Pleasant, already known among folklore enthusiasts, became a destination for tourists, paranormal investigators, and fans of the movie. The small West Virginia town embraced its eerie claim to fame, establishing the Mothman Museum and launching the annual Mothman Festival, which continues to draw thousands of visitors each year. Shops sell Mothman memorabilia, from t-shirts to plush dolls, blending humor with horror. What was once a local tragedy wrapped in mystery became a cultural celebration of the strange and unexplained. Beyond Point Pleasant, the Mothman became a recognizable figure in wider pop culture. He began appearing in comic books, television shows, and even video games. Programs like The X-Files, Mountain Monsters, and BuzzFeed Unsolved referenced the creature, while countless paranormal podcasts retold the legend for new audiences. In gaming, he emerged as an eerie Easter egg, most notably in Fallout 76, which included the Mothman as both a terrifying adversary and a cult figure worshipped by post-apocalyptic survivors. These appearances further cemented him as more than a local myth. He became part of the pantheon of America's modern folklore monsters. Alongside Bigfoot, the Jersey Devil, and the Chupacabra memes, an internet culture also gave the Mothman a strange second life. Online, the creature transformed from a harbinger of doom into a figure of dark comedy and even affection. Artists reimagined him in humorous illustrations, casting the terrifying red-eyed figure as a misunderstood cryptid in need of love. Despite this lighthearted reinterpretation, the roots of fear remained. Behind every joke and meme, the shadow of the original legend lingered, reminding audiences of the bridge collapse, the unexplained sightings, and the chilling sense that the creature was tied to death and disaster. Part of what makes the Mothman endure in pop culture is the way his story blends multiple elements of fear. He is not only a cryptid, but also a symbol of prophecy, a figure linked to psychic phenomena and tragedies. Unlike monsters that can be hunted or explained, the Mothman remains elusive, his true purpose unknowable. This ambiguity makes him adaptable to countless interpretations. To some, he is a warning from the universe. To others, he is a supernatural predator. And to many more, he is simply an icon of the unexplained, embodying humanity's fear of forces beyond its control. The 2002 film played a pivotal role in solidifying this cultural versatility. By not providing a definitive explanation for the creature, the movie allowed the Mothman to live on in the imaginations of audiences. Fans could project their own fears and theories onto him, ensuring that he would remain relevant long after the credits rolled. The film also tied the legend to universal themes of grief, fate, and the fragility of human life, making the story resonate with viewers far beyond the small town of Point Pleasant. 2 decades later, the impact of the Mothman Prophecies film is still felt. For many who had never heard of the creature, it was their introduction to the legend. For others, it validated their fascination with cryptids, UFOs, and the unexplained. The success of the film demonstrated that stories rooted in folklore could captivate global audiences, paving the way for more paranormal and cryptid tales in popular media. It also transformed the Mothman from a regional mystery into a figure of enduring cultural significance. Yet, even as the Mothman enjoys his place in festivals, museums, video games, and memes, the darker heart of the legend still beats. The original stories were never lighthearted. They were filled with fear, tragedy, and unanswered questions. The Silver Bridge collapse remains a wound in Point Pleasant's history. And for those who lost loved ones, the creature's presence is forever tied to sorrow. Every retelling, no matter how playful, still carries that shadow of dread. The idea that the Mothman is not merely a story, but a harbinger of catastrophe. The rise of the Mothman in film and pop culture shows how legends evolve over time. What began as terrified whispers in a small Appalachian town grew into a global phenomenon, inspiring fear, curiosity, and even laughter. But at the core of it all is the same unsettling mystery. A dark figure with glowing eyes, appearing when disaster looms. The 2002 film may have introduced him to millions. But the fear behind the story, the sense that some things cannot be explained, and that fate itself may be unavoidable, remains as haunting as ever. In the small town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, the legend of the Mothman has become both a chilling memory and a celebrated part of its identity. Where once fear gripped the community after repeated sightings of a winged red-eyed creature in the 1960s. Today, the town embraces the mysterious figure as a piece of folklore that refuses to fade away. Perhaps the most striking tribute to this legend stands in the heart of Point Pleasant, the Mothman statue. Crafted from gleaming metal and rising tall over the streets, the statue has become a focal point for tourists and believers alike, offering a tangible reminder of a story that still lingers in the air of the Ohio Valley. The statue itself was unveiled in 2003. Designed and built by artist Bob Roach, it stands over 12 feet tall, with muscular arms, massive wings, and eyes crafted to reflect a menacing glow. Its body is polished stainless steel, catching the sunlight by day and the glow of the street lamps by night. The figure is not cartoonish or playful, but instead depicts the creature as it was often described by witnesses: powerful, intimidating, and otherworldly. Tourists and locals flock to the statue to take photos, pose beneath its wings, and marvel at how something born of terror became a work of public art. But like so many things tied to the Mothman, even the statue carries its own aura of unease. Some visitors claim that after sundown, when the streets quiet down and shadows creep along the town, the statue changes. The red eyes, made from pieces of red reflector, are said to glow more brightly at night, sometimes pulsing faintly as if alive. A few have sworn they've walked past it and seen the light shift, as though the statue was watching them. Others describe a chill that settles around the monument after midnight, colder than the rest of the air, leaving them with goosebumps as they hurry away. Locals whisper that the statue is more than a tribute, it may be a vessel. Some believe that by immortalizing the Mothman in steel, Point Pleasant anchored the creature's energy to the town, binding it so that it never fully leaves. According to these stories, when the streets are empty and the Ohio River mist drifts through the town, the spirit of the real Mothman moves through the statue, animating it in ways that can't be explained. Witnesses have claimed to hear scraping noises near its base, like claws dragging against metal. or soft tapping sounds on the sidewalk when no one else is around. The placement of the statue is no accident. It sits prominently in downtown Point Pleasant, near the Mothman Museum, which houses eyewitness accounts, newspaper clippings, and artifacts from the original wave of sightings in 1966 and 1967. The town has built an entire festival around the figure. The Mothman Festival, where thousands of people gather each September to celebrate the legend. Vendors sell themed merchandise. Guest speakers discuss theories ranging from paranormal encounters to cryptozoology, and visitors explore the dark history of the Silver Bridge collapse, the tragedy forever linked to the Mothman's appearances. Yet even during the lively atmosphere of the festival, with laughter, music, and food stands filling the streets, there are moments when the statue seems to hold its own presence. Photographs taken at the site have sometimes turned up with strange anomalies, blurs, streaks of light, or odd shadows stretching in unnatural directions. Some festivalgoers have claimed that when they posed for photos, they felt a sudden vibration beneath their feet, as if the ground trembled faintly under the statue. Others insist that while standing near it, they heard a low hum that seemed to come from the metal itself. Too faint for most to notice, but impossible to ignore once it caught the ear. Skeptics dismiss these stories, suggesting that the glowing eyes are nothing more than reflective tricks from passing headlights, and that the supposed noises are simply the normal groans of metal cooling in the night air. To them, the statue is just a clever tourist attraction, a way for the town to embrace its folklore and draw visitors from across the country. But for those who know the weight of the Mothman legend, the statue is more than steel and artistry. It is a reminder that some mysteries do not fade simply because time passes. The red eyes of the statue, whether glowing by design or by something less explainable, call back to the original terror of the sightings along the roads and riverbanks of Point Pleasant. Those who once saw the creature described the same piercing stare, a gaze that seemed to cut through the night and fix upon those unfortunate enough to encounter it. By embodying those details, the statue does more than preserve history, it stirs it, keeping alive the questions that still surround the Mothman. Was it a harbinger of doom, a supernatural warning tied to the Silver Bridge collapse? Or was it something far stranger, a being slipping between worlds, glimpsed only long enough to leave a permanent scar on those who saw it? Standing before the statue today, one can't help but feel the weight of those questions. The polished steel reflects the town, the people, and the river beyond, but behind the shine lies the shadow of the legend itself. Visitors snap photos and smile, but as night deepens and the streets empty, the mood shifts. A lone passerby might pause, glance at the glowing eyes, and wonder if the creature itself ever truly left or if it simply waits, hidden behind its own monument, watching the people of Point Pleasant through eyes that never close. In this way, the Mothman statue serves two purposes. By day, it is a landmark of pride, a centerpiece for tourism and celebration. By night, it becomes something more unsettling, a symbol that the legend is not just folklore but a lingering presence woven into the soul of the town. And whether one believes the statue is merely steel or something alive, it stands unchallenged as a sentinel in the heart of Point Pleasant, ensuring that the Mothman story is never forgotten. Every September, Point Pleasant, West Virginia, transforms from a quiet riverside town into a hub of mystery, folklore, and festivity. The Mothman Festival draws thousands of people from across the world, all eager to celebrate a legend that has haunted the region since the late 1960s. What began as a terrifying series of sightings has since evolved into a cultural phenomenon, and the festival is at the center of that transformation. Yet beneath the laughter, costumes, and carnival-like atmosphere, there remains a lingering unease. Some visitors swear that the festival isn't just about remembering the Mothman's about its continued presence, hidden in the shadows of the crowd. The event began as a small community gathering, a way to bring tourism and recognition to a town forever linked to one of America's most enduring supernatural legends. Today, the Mothman Festival has grown into a spectacle. Streets filled with food vendors offering Mothman burgers and red-eyed cocktails. while booths sell memorabilia shirts, books, artwork, and trinkets featuring the winged creature. Costumed fans, some dressed in elaborate wings and glowing red goggles, pose for pictures in front of the famous stainless steel Mothman statue that stands at the center of town. Guest speakers give lectures about cryptids, UFOs, and paranormal encounters, keeping alive the memory of the strange events that once plagued Point Pleasant. Paranormal researchers, authors, and eyewitnesses to the original sightings share their stories in packed halls, each testimony weaving together a patchwork of fear, wonder, and unanswered questions. For locals, it's a chance to remember their place in history. For visitors, it's a chance to immerse themselves in the myth, if only for a weekend. But amid the excitement, there are whispers. Some attendees report strange feelings while walking near the old TNT area, north of town, where many of the original Mothman sightings took place. Abandoned bunkers and crumbling concrete structures loom in the woods, reminders of Point Pleasant's wartime past. Festival tours often take curious crowds to this desolate place, where shadows move strangely, and the air feels heavier than anywhere else. A few visitors swear they hear faint rustling, as though large wings are brushing against the trees. Others have described the unsettling sensation of being watched, even when the group is alone. The eerie atmosphere is not confined to the TNT area. Some festival goers claim that late at night, when the streets grow quieter and the last vendors pack up their stands, a different mood overtakes the town. The cheerful red eyes of the statue seem to glow unnaturally, pulsing like embers. Locals dismiss it as lighting tricks or the power of suggestion, but the stories persist. A handful of visitors have even claimed to see a shadowy figure perched on rooftops, its outline blurred against the night sky before vanishing without a sound. The irony of the festival is hard to ignore. What was once a harrowing ordeal for the townspeople, weeks of fear, strange lights in the sky, men in black encounters, and the collapse of the Silver Bridge, has become a celebration, complete with parades and concerts. Yet even as the Mothman's image is sold on mugs and keychains, those who have felt the weight of the legend know the darker roots that lie beneath. The screams reported by witnesses, the glowing red eyes, the sense of dread, all of these memories linger, a reminder that the Mothman story is not just folklore, but lived experience. For many, the festival serves as more than just entertainment. It is a way of confronting fear. By laughing, dressing up, and celebrating, the community has turned something terrifying into a shared cultural identity. Yet the undercurrent of unease makes the festival unlike any other. Few events in America are built on a foundation of tragedy, myth, and unexplained phenomena. Visitors arrive curious, but many leave with an unsettling feeling that the line between celebration and invocation is thin. Eyewitnesses sometimes attend the festival quietly, blending into the crowd. A few have admitted that coming back to Point Pleasant is difficult, that being reminded of what they saw dredges up old fear. But there is also a strange comfort in knowing that the legend has grown into something larger than themselves, that their experiences sparked a story powerful enough to capture imaginations for decades. The Festival of Fear, as some locals call it, is not just about honoring a legend, it is about living with it. Point Pleasant thrives on its connection to the Mothman, yet the creature's mystery still casts a shadow over every gathering, whether he was a harbinger of doom, a misidentified animal, or something from beyond human understanding. His presence continues to define the town. As fireworks light up the Ohio River at the close of the festival, many cheer and celebrate. Yet somewhere, in the dark beyond the lights, some claim to hear something else. A faint rustling, like wings shifting against the wind. A distant cry, sharp and metallic, carried over the water. The crowd moves on. The music plays, but a select few pause and glance to the skies. Every year, stories return with those who leave the festival. Stories of strange dreams, shadows in the woods, or glowing eyes glimpsed for just a second. Whether imagination or something more, the legend refuses to fade. Point Pleasant may celebrate the Mothman, but it cannot escape him. The Mothman Museum in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, stands as a shrine to one of America's most enduring legends. Tucked along Main Street, it is both a tourist attraction and a historical archive, containing everything from original eyewitness reports to old newspaper clippings, artifacts, and even props from the 2002 film. To many, it is a place to explore curiosity and folklore. But to those who spend time inside its walls after the doors are locked and the lights are dimmed, the museum is more than a collection of relics. It feels alive, as though the story it preserves has never ended and, as if the creature itself still lingers within. The museum was founded by Jeff Walmsley, a local who grew up hearing the stories of the Mothman. His passion turned into a mission to preserve the first-hand accounts of the strange events that rocked Point Pleasant in the mid-1960s. Inside, visitors can read copies of the original police reports describing the strange winged figure with glowing red eyes. Newspaper headlines chronicled the growing panic as sightings multiplied. The walls are lined with photographs of the witnesses themselves, ordinary townsfolk, who swore they had seen something extraordinary lurking near the abandoned TNT plant or swooping low over the Ohio River. At first glance, the museum is no different from any other small-town attraction. Display cases hold fragments of history, shelves are stacked with books, and a gift shop offers souvenirs. But the atmosphere is undeniably different. Some describe it as heavy, as though the air itself carries a kind of charge. Guests sometimes pause while reading, glancing over their shoulder without knowing why. Others mention a faint chill that runs through the building even on warm summer days, as if unseen eyes are watching them examine the exhibits. Employees, however, have the most unnerving experiences. Those tasked with closing at night often linger uneasily before switching off the last of the lights. Some report hearing faint tapping sounds echoing against the glass of the display cases. Others describe soft footsteps pacing the wooden floors when no one else is inside. The museum is not large, and every creak of the building is noticeable. But these noises carry a rhythm, as if deliberate, purposeful, and aware of those still present. One staff member recalled finishing up late one autumn evening when she heard the sound of heavy wings beating overhead. She froze, her eyes scanning the ceiling, only to find the room empty. The noise echoed as if something massive had brushed past, disturbing the very air. She quickly left, and when she returned the next morning, a stack of newspapers she had left neatly arranged had been scattered across the floor. No windows were open, and the security system showed no sign of forced entry. Visitors, too, occasionally experienced the unexplained. Some claimed to have heard faint whispers while reading the eyewitness reports. One man reported feeling a sudden wave of dread while examining a map that detailed the creature's most common haunts, only to turn and find no one near him. Another guest swore that as he leaned closer to the glass case containing sketches of the creature, he caught the reflection of glowing red eyes behind him. He spun around, heart pounding, but the room was empty. The strangest accounts involve the museum's own centerpiece, a large figure of the Mothman, designed to replicate descriptions from the original sightings. During the day, it is simply a model, a silent reminder of the legend. But after dark, some claim its eyes shimmer faintly in the dim light, not with the reflection of lamps, but with a dull red glow of their own. A few employees admit that they avoid looking at it too long after hours, uneasy with how lifelike it seems in the silence. Skeptics insist that the unsettling atmosphere can be explained. Old buildings creak and shift, drafts whisper through the cracks. Minds already steeped in eerie stories play tricks on themselves when confronted with artifacts from the legend. Yet, even the skeptical often admit that the museum feels different, less like a place of memory, and more like a doorway between what happened in Point Pleasant and what may still be happening. Some suggest that the energy comes not from the creature itself, but from the people who lived through the events. The terror of 1966 and 1967 left deep scars on the town. That fear, captured in headlines, reports, and retellings, may have seeped into the very objects now preserved in the museum. Just as battlefields are said to carry the echoes of those who perished, perhaps the museum carries the echoes of fear, the cries of startled witnesses, the anxiety of townsfolk, the unresolved mystery of the Mothman. Still, there are those who believe the presence is far more direct. They argue that the Mothman, if it exists, is tied not just to the land, but to its own legend. Every retelling, every display, every photograph is a reminder, a kind of beacon that draws it closer. And what better place to linger than a museum dedicated entirely to its memory? If so, then the noises, the shadows, and the glowing eyes are not imagination. They are proof that the creature is not a relic of the past, but a presence that remains. Today, thousands of visitors walk through the museum each year, fascinated by the blend of folklore and fact. For most, it is simply an unusual stop, a chance to peer into a small town's brush with the unknown. But for some, it is an experience they will never forget, haunted not by what they saw, but by what they felt, a reminder that sometimes history refuses to stay silent. And so the Mothman Museum continues its strange work. It preserves the past, but it also carries the weight of something unresolved, something that resists being locked behind glass. After the lights go out and the last key turns in the lock, the building does not rest. Instead, it stirs with whispers, footsteps, and wings, as though the legend it keeps is still alive, watching, waiting, and reminding all who enter that the story of the Mothman is far from over. In the late 1970s, the quiet German town of Freiburg found itself at the center of one of the most unsettling tales of modern folklore. The area, rich with coal and mining traditions, was no stranger to hardship. But in 1978, something happened that would enter both legend and terror. It came to be known as the case of the Freiburg, a creature described as a winged humanoid whose very presence seemed like a warning from beyond. To this day, many locals whisper that it may have been the same kind of being that haunted Point Pleasant, West Virginia, in America, as the Mothman. On a cold, misty morning, a group of miners set out for another long day's work at a mine just outside. These men were seasoned and familiar with the dangers of their occupation. Collapses, cave-ins, and equipment failures were a constant risk, but mining was their livelihood, and fear had little place in their routine. Yet that morning was different. As they approached the entrance, they stopped in their tracks, frozen by the sight of something unnatural standing in their way. Perched on a rocky outcrop above the mine entrance was a dark figure. The men described it later as having the body of a man, but with massive outstretched wings like those of a bat. Its eyes glowed a deep, unnatural red that seemed to pierce through the fog. What truly unsettled them, however, was the sound that echoed from the creature. It let out a shriek so loud and piercing that several of the miners dropped their tools and clutched their ears, describing it as a sound unlike anything human or animal they had ever heard. It was a sound that seemed to resonate in their bones, a warning of something catastrophic. The miners, terrified and unwilling to cross the figure, hesitated. Some wanted to leave, convinced that entering the mine that day was courting disaster. Others argued that it was some strange bird or a trick of the fog, and that superstition should not cost them a day's wages. As the argument continued, the shrieking grew louder. The creature shifted, spreading its wings wide, blocking the entrance entirely. Its stance left no doubt it did not want them to pass. The men finally relented, deciding to remain outside until the creature left. Minutes passed in tense silence, broken only by that haunting shriek, and then the ground began to tremble. From deep within the mine came a low rumble that grew into a deafening roar. Before their eyes, the mine shaft collapsed inward, a thunderous explosion of rock and dust blasting outward from the entrance. The very spot where they would have been working caved in completely, sealing the tunnels and ensuring certain death for anyone inside. Shaken but alive, the miners turned back toward the rocky outcrop. The creature was gone. It had vanished as suddenly as it appeared, leaving behind no trace except the echo of its scream. The men, who would have been crushed or trapped beneath tons of rock, owed their survival to the warning of that strange being. When word spread, the townsfolk gave the creature a name, the Freiburg Shrieker. It became a figure of dread and fascination, an omen tied forever to disaster and salvation in equal measure. For some, it was a monster. a malevolent figure whose scream could strike terror in the hearts of men. For others, it was a guardian, a dark angel of sorts, warning of catastrophe and sparing the lives of the miners who heeded its cry. In the years since, the story of the Freiburg Shrieker has been compared to that of the Mothman of West Virginia. The parallels are difficult to ignore. Both were described as winged humanoids with glowing red eyes. Both emitted eerie sounds that terrified witnesses, and both appeared in connection with disaster. Where the Mothman was seen before the collapse of the Silver Bridge in 1967, the Shrieker revealed itself before the collapse of the German mine. Skeptics, of course, have their explanations. Some suggest the miners saw a large owl or other bird of prey, its wings spread in the fog, its calls mistaken for shrieking. Fear and superstition, they argue, did the rest. Others point to stress and the dangerous nature of mining, suggesting the men's subconscious fears manifested as visions of a supernatural guardian. Yet for those who were there, the memory is too vivid and too consistent to dismiss as a trick of the mind. Each man described the same towering figure, the same glowing eyes, the same unearthly scream. Folklorists have gone further, connecting the Freiburg Shrieker to a wider pattern of winged humanoid sightings throughout history. Tales of banshees in Ireland, harpies in ancient Greece, and prophetic bird-like beings in Native American traditions all echo the same archetype, a winged entity whose cry signals death or disaster. To the miners of Freiburg, this was no ancient myth, but a living reality, one that saved them from being entombed underground. What makes the story even more compelling is that some witnesses later claimed to see the Shrieker again, though never as clearly as that morning. A few townsfolk reported hearing it scream on stormy nights, a sound carried on the wind like a warning of danger close at hand. Others spoke of shadowy wings glimpsed against the moonlight near the collapsed mine, as though the creature lingered there, guarding the site or haunting it. To this day, the Freiburg mine disaster is remembered not only for the tragedy of the collapse, but for the eerie presence that seemed to predict it. The Shrieker stands as both a terrifying omen and a strange protector, one whose existence blurs the line between folklore and fact. Was it a cousin of the Mothman, a European echo of the same mysterious force that haunted Point Pleasant? Or was it something older, a timeless being that manifests wherever catastrophe strikes, forever tied to humanity's greatest fears? In the weeks leading up to the catastrophic nuclear accident at Chernobyl in 1986, whispers circulated among the workers at the plant about a strange presence that seemed to loom over the facility. This presence was described as a massive, bird-like creature with dark wings and eyes that glowed a deep, unnatural red. Those who claimed to have seen it gave it a name that would endure in the annals of supernatural lore: the Black Bird of Chernobyl. To some, it was nothing more than an eerie folktale born out of the paranoia and stress of working in a dangerous environment. To others, it was a chilling omen, a creature sent to warn of the coming devastation. The reports began subtly. A few employees spoke of seeing something circling the skies near Reactor 4 at odd hours. At first it was dismissed as a large bird of prey, perhaps a stork or a hawk, common to the region. But as the sightings grew more frequent, the details became far too strange to brush aside. Workers described the figure as humanoid in shape, taller than any man, its wings stretching impossibly wide. Most terrifying were the eyes burning coals in the darkness, fixed upon those who dared to look up. Some claimed that when they locked eyes with the entity, they were struck with overwhelming dread, a feeling of doom that clung to them long after the figure had vanished into the night sky. Soon, the sightings were accompanied by another phenomenon: disturbing dreams and visions. Employees reported waking in the dead of night, drenched in sweat, after seeing the creature in their sleep. Some said they dreamed of explosions, fire, and screams, all under the gaze of the black bird. Others claimed to hear shrill cries echoing in their ears even while awake, a sound they could not explain, but one that filled them with unease. Word of the entity spread quickly among the workers, and though supervisors dismissed the tales as superstition, many employees began to fear coming to work. The story reached a fever pitch in April of 1986. Several workers allegedly saw the creature perched on the metal framework of the plant itself, watching silently from above. A few even claimed it flew directly over Reactor 4, circling like a vulture over prey. The sightings left those who witnessed it shaken, convinced that the plant was under some sort of curse. Then came the night of April 26th. At 1:23 a.m., Reactor 4 exploded in one of the worst nuclear disasters the world has ever seen. The blast tore through the plant, releasing a massive cloud of radioactive material that spread across Europe. The consequences would be felt for generations, thousands of lives lost, countless more scarred by illness, and entire towns abandoned to radiation. In the aftermath of the disaster, the legend of the Black Bird of Chernobyl took on new meaning. Survivors and witnesses looked back at the reports of the winged figure and interpreted them not as random sightings, but as warnings. They believed the creature had appeared to alert them of the catastrophe to come. Much like the tales of the Mothman in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, 2 decades earlier. Just as the Mothman was linked to the collapse of the Silver Bridge, so too was the Black Bird forever tied to the tragedy of Chernobyl. Some theorists suggest that the Black Bird was a supernatural harbinger, a being that manifests in times of great disaster to warn humanity of impending doom. Others believe it to be a guardian of sorts, not bringing destruction, but attempting to save lives by instilling fear and caution. After all, in the case of the Freiburg Shrieker in Germany, miners claimed a similar winged figure prevented them from entering a mine moments before it collapsed, sparing their lives. Was the Black Bird trying to warn the people of Chernobyl in the same way, though its message went unheeded? Skeptics, of course, have their explanations. They argue that the sightings were likely misidentified birds, amplified by the stress and tension of working in a facility known to have safety issues. Some point to the psychological strain on the workers, combined with the Soviet culture of secrecy, which created fertile ground for rumors and legends to flourish. Others suggest that the story of the Mothman may have influenced interpretations of what people thought they saw, with details exaggerated over time. Yet, those who truly believe in the Black Bird are not so easily swayed by skepticism. What remains most haunting are the testimonies of those who lived through the disaster and later admitted that they had seen the creature. Some described its presence on the night of the explosion itself, saying it was visible in the flames and smoke that poured from the reactor. Others swore they saw it fleeing the scene, disappearing into the night sky, just as helicopters arrived to assess the damage. These chilling accounts, impossible to verify but difficult to ignore, only added to the aura of mystery surrounding the entity. Today, the story of the Black Bird of Chernobyl is a fixture in paranormal lore. It stands alongside the Mothman as one of the most infamous winged omens of disaster. For those who believe, the creature is not a monster to be feared, but a messenger whose warnings should be taken seriously. For skeptics, it is a sobering reminder of how human fear and tragedy can create legends that endure long after the events themselves. And for those who still visit the ghost city of Pripyat and the ruined remains of the power plant, the tale lingers like the radiation in the soil, an invisible presence, heavy and unsettling, impossible to escape. Whether real or imagined, the Black Bird of Chernobyl remains a symbol of one of the darkest moments in modern history. It is a figure born from fire, death, and fear, a spectral shadow forever linked to the disaster that changed the world. For some, it was a warning too late. For others, it is proof that even in the depths of human catastrophe, there are forces watching from the sky's weather, to haunt us, to warn us, or perhaps, to remind us of our own fragile existence in the face of destiny. In the weeks leading up to September 11, 2001, a number of strange and unsettling sightings began circulating in New York City, whispered among those who would later recount their experiences in hushed tones. According to some chilling testimonies, winged red-eyed figures were seen near the Twin Towers in Lower Manhattan. Witnesses described creatures unlike any bird or plane, humanoid in shape, yet with vast, dark wings and eyes that glowed a deep crimson in the sunlight and artificial light alike. To those who saw them, The figures seemed almost alive with purpose. Their movements deliberate, gliding silently through the air as if observing the city below. The reports were initially dismissed as urban legend or the product of heightened anxiety following a decade of domestic and international tensions. New Yorkers had grown accustomed to the city's constant hum of activity, from construction cranes to helicopters, and an unusual sighting could easily be attributed to stress or imagination. Yet the consistency of the accounts, coming from multiple locations near the towers, began to draw attention among paranormal enthusiasts and researchers. Witnesses described the same red eyes, the same winged humanoid form, and the same overwhelming sense of dread that seemed to radiate from the figures. Many people reported seeing the creatures hovering at dawn or dusk, when the light cast long shadows and the city streets were less crowded. Office workers in high-rise buildings glanced out of windows and froze, convinced they saw shapes moving unnaturally between rooftops. Street vendors and pedestrians recounted the same, noticing figures that appeared far too large and too silent to be any known bird. One witness described a particular encounter where a shadow passed over a rooftop garden, followed by the sensation of being watched, a prickling unease that lingered long after the creature had vanished from sight. For those who believe in the connection between the sightings and tragedy, the idea is simple. The Mothman, or its spectral counterpart, appears before disasters as a harbinger, a warning that catastrophe is imminent. The legend of the Mothman, rooted in the Point Pleasant sightings of the 1960s, has long been linked to death and disaster. Witnesses there reported seeing a red-eyed, winged humanoid before the collapse of the Silver Bridge in 1967, a tragedy that claimed dozens of lives. Over time, the pattern seemed to extend beyond West Virginia, with similar entities appearing in Germany before the Freiburg mine collapse and even near Chernobyl before the nuclear disaster. To believers, the 9/11 sightings were part of this ominous chain. Skeptics, however, have dismissed these accounts as coincidence, misidentification, or post-event embellishment. New York City is full of tall buildings, cranes, and commercial drones, and the mind is prone to filling in gaps during times of stress. Some theorists suggest that the trauma of witnessing such a massive, incomprehensible event afterward may have retroactively influenced memories, making mundane shadows appear supernatural in hindsight. Despite these explanations, the number of independent witnesses claiming to have seen winged, red-eyed figures prior to September 11th has fueled speculation and kept the story alive. Eyewitness accounts describe the figures behaving strangely, as if testing the city, observing patterns of movement and disappearing when approached. One woman, a receptionist in a nearby building, said she noticed a figure gliding along the east side of the towers at 7 a.m., almost invisible against the reflective glass. The figure seemed to pause over the plaza below, casting a shadow that made the entire area feel colder. A quiet that was broken only later by the shocking news of the attacks. Others described seeing the creatures retreat toward the Hudson River or vanishing behind nearby skyscrapers, leaving behind an empty sky that suddenly felt too vast and too quiet. Paranormal investigators have since documented these accounts, noting the eerie parallels with other Mothman sightings before disasters. In each case, witnesses described a similar humanoid form, red eyes, silent flight, and a sense of warning or dread. While evidence remains anecdotal, the consistency of these details across time and geography has fascinated researchers. For some, it is proof that certain patterns of premonition may manifest in tangible forms, a warning system embedded in the world's hidden fabric. In the aftermath of September 11th, the legend of the Mothman gained renewed attention. The idea that the creature could appear before national tragedies captured imaginations and fears alike. Forums, books, and documentaries began exploring the possibility, linking the 9/11 sightings to previous encounters in West Virginia, Germany, and Chernobyl. While mainstream media largely ignored the stories, the narrative persisted in paranormal communities, where the sightings were analyzed alongside historical patterns and eyewitness testimonies. The persistence of the legend is a testament to humanity's need to find meaning in chaos. The Twin Towers fell in a sudden, incomprehensible disaster that left thousands dead and a nation in mourning. In that context, the sightings of winged red-eyed figures offered a narrative that framed the catastrophe as part of a larger cosmic warning system. To some, it is a way to process tragedy, to believe that disasters, though devastating, are not entirely random, that there are unseen forces observing, cautioning, and perhaps trying to prevent the worst outcomes. Today, the story of the 9/11's Mothman sightings remains controversial. Critics dismiss it as coincidence or misperception, while believers continue to recount first-hand experiences of the shadowy figures in Lower Manhattan. Regardless of interpretation, the tale endures as a chilling reminder of the unknown. A story that intertwines tragedy, mystery, and the uncanny. For those who claim to have seen the winged figures, the memory is indelible, a moment when the ordinary world gave way to something unexplainable, a silent herald of the horror to come. In the quiet stretches of rural Kentucky, long after the tales of Point Pleasant had faded into legend, travelers began reporting a new wave of eerie sightings, along winding highways, near dense forests, and beside quiet river bends. People described encountering a winged humanoid figure unlike anything they had ever seen. The creature moved with unnerving precision, gliding just above the asphalt as if tracking the movement of vehicles below. Its eyes glowed a deep crimson, piercing through the dark night or the fading light of dusk, and its massive wingspan cast shadows that seemed far too large for a human being. Locals whispered about the sightings in hushed tones, suggesting that the Mothman, long associated with disaster in West Virginia, had migrated south, following sorrow and tragedy in its wake. The reports began sporadically in the late 1980s but gained attention in the 1990s as more travelers came forward. A truck driver traveling along a stretch of I-71 recounted how, on a foggy evening, he saw a dark figure swoop low across the highway, its wings brushing the tops of his vehicle, only to watch the figure vanish into the tree line, leaving behind an eerie silence broken only by the sound of his own engine. The sight left him shaken, and he described a lingering sense of being watched long after the incident. Other motorists reported similar experiences. A couple driving home from Louisville described seeing a shadowy figure perched on a roadside overpass, glowing eyes fixed on their car. As they approached, they braked sharply, fearing a collision. But by the time they reached the spot, nothing remained. Only the feeling of dread lingered, an unnatural chill that filled the car and refused to dissipate until hours later. In each of these encounters, witnesses noted a consistency in the creature's appearance: a humanoid form, massive wings, glowing red eyes, and a predatory grace that defied known biology. Locals quickly began to weave the sightings into a broader narrative. Farmers and hunters reported seeing the figure vanish into forests near their properties, leaving only disturbed undergrowth or broken branches as evidence of its passage. Some claimed that livestock would behave strangely after an encounter, refusing to graze or huddling in corners, as if sensing a malevolent presence in the area. Tales spread of low, shrill cries echoing through the night, sounds that were neither human nor bird-like, yet hauntingly reminiscent of the screams reported in Point Pleasant decades earlier. Researchers and enthusiasts began drawing parallels to the Mothman phenomenon, suggesting that the creature may not be confined to one region. Just as the Silver Bridge collapse in West Virginia coincided with multiple sightings, Kentucky residents began to correlate the appearances with moments of tragedy or misfortune. In several cases, accidents on highways or sudden natural events seemed to follow soon after a sighting. While skeptics dismissed these connections as coincidence, believers argued that the Mothman or its regional variant moved where human danger or sorrow was likely to strike, perhaps serving as a warning of things yet to come. Eyewitness testimonies often describe a profound psychological impact. One woman, driving alone on a rural back road near Lexington, reported seeing the creature hovering above the tree line. Its eyes met hers for an instant, and she felt an overwhelming sensation of foreboding. Though she reached home safely, she said she could not shake the feeling that something terrible was imminent. Others report similar experiences. sudden headaches, chills, or the sense of being followed long after the figure disappears. The account suggests that the creature's presence is not merely physical, but psychological, leaving traces of fear and unease in those who encounter it. The idea that the Mothman had moved south into Kentucky captured the imagination of cryptid enthusiasts. Some theorists suggested a seasonal migration, following patterns of disaster and human suffering. Others posited that the creature is timeless, appearing wherever tragedy might occur, using its wings to travel quickly from region to region. Regardless of theory, the stories persisted, and the forests and backroads of Kentucky became a new stage for the legend to play out. Many of the sightings occurred in isolated areas, which only added to the fear and fascination. Sparse traffic, dense woods, and rolling hills created a natural environment for the creature to move unseen. Those who witnessed it in these settings describe a heightened sense of vulnerability, as if the Mothman is aware of human limitations and takes advantage of them. One trucker described a figure swooping alongside his vehicle, gliding silently as though matching his speed, before disappearing into the fog without a trace. He later noted that the section of road where he saw it was the site of a fatal accident the following week, reinforcing the idea that the creature is somehow linked to impending calamity. Local folklore grew around these encounters. Some claimed that the creature could manipulate the environment, creating sudden gusts of wind or unnerving shadows to warn or terrify humans. Hunters reported that their dogs would growl at nothing, refusing to enter parts of the forest where sightings had been reported. The figure seemed both elusive and purposeful, appearing just long enough to be noticed, yet never fully understood. The pattern echoed earlier Mothman sightings, an intersection of fear, mystery, and tragedy that left witnesses questioning the boundaries of reality. Today, the Kentucky encounters remain a subject of fascination and caution. Paranormal investigators continue to document sightings, interviewing witnesses and tracking reports across highways and forests. Locals share their experiences with new travelers, ensuring that the legend remains alive. While some dismiss it as a series of coincidences or overactive imaginations, others firmly believe that the Mothman or its southern cousin still watches over Kentucky, a dark sentinel moving silently between the trees, the roads, and the skies, forever tied to sorrow and disaster. The story of the Kentucky Mothman is a continuation of a larger narrative, one that began in Point Pleasant and has echoed across the globe. Whether a harbinger of doom, a guardian, or a creature beyond human understanding, it reminds us that some mysteries refuse to be confined to one place or time. Travelers who traverse the highways and forests of Kentucky may never see it, yet the legend persists in their imagination, in whispers, and in the chilling knowledge that in the dark of night, a pair of glowing red eyes may be watching from above, waiting to appear where tragedy is near. In the decades since the first Mothman sightings in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, the legend has grown to encompass more than a winged humanoid with glowing red eyes. Alongside the creature itself, another mystery has emerged, one that seems far more human, yet deeply unnatural. These are the so-called men in black, figures dressed in dark suits who appear to witnesses after they report encounters with the Mothman. Unlike the creature's terrifying presence in the skies, the men in black move silently through the mundane world, blending into offices, diners, and streets, yet carrying an aura of menace that is difficult to ignore. Reports of these figures have persisted well into the modern era. People who claim to have seen the Mothman often describe being visited shortly afterward by one or more men in black suits. They appear unannounced, sometimes at the door, sometimes in a parked car nearby. Witnesses often describe them as unnervingly tall or slightly off in their proportions, with movements that are fluid yet disturbingly mechanical. Their voices, when they speak, are quiet, calm, and controlled, but carry a weight that leaves the listener anxious and uneasy. The most consistent message delivered by these visitors is simple but chilling. Do not speak of what you saw. One woman, who claimed to have spotted a red-eyed, winged figure near the Ohio River, recounted an encounter with two men in black who arrived at her workplace just days later. They asked questions about her movements and where she had been, their tone polite but impossibly insistent. When she tried to mention the creature she had seen, one of the men leaned in, his eyes dark and unsettling, and quietly warned her to remain silent. After they left, she felt a lingering dread that lasted for days, and she never spoke publicly about the Mothman encounter again. Other witnesses described similar experiences. A man who encountered the creature while hiking in West Virginia returned home to find a black sedan parked across the street from his apartment. Two men stepped out, approaching calmly and carrying an air of authority that felt unnatural. They asked about his experience with an almost rehearsed cadence, probing gently but firmly. When he hesitated or tried to provide details, their expressions remained blank. But their message was unmistakable. The less said, the safer he would be. After their departure, he noticed small, inexplicable items slightly moved in his apartment, strange footprints in the dust that hinted at their presence long after they left. The phenomenon is not limited to Point Pleasant. Witnesses across the United States and even abroad have reported encounters with similar figures following sightings of winged, red-eyed creatures or other cryptid phenomena. In some cases, they arrive alone, in others in pairs or small groups. Their purpose, according to those who have encountered them, is not overtly violent, yet the effect is psychologically invasive. They communicate a clear warning. Speak of the events at your peril. Some witnesses have interpreted these warnings as protective, believing the men in black prevent them from drawing attention to dangerous or supernatural forces. Others see them as sinister entities intent on controlling information and instilling fear. Descriptions of the men in black share consistent traits. Their clothing is always dark and formal, often suits and ties, despite weather or setting. Their eyes are frequently described as unsettling, either too dark, too reflective, or strangely unnatural in their movements. Some witnesses note an odd stillness in their presence, as if they are not bound by ordinary human behavior. Footsteps are soft, movements precise and deliberate, and they often appear and disappear with little explanation. Even their vehicles, when mentioned, seem unremarkable at first glance, but are reported as oddly clean, black, and silent, adding to the eerie impression of otherworldly control. Paranormal researchers and cryptid enthusiasts speculate that these figures may be connected to the same forces behind the Mothman itself. If the creature is a harbinger of disaster, the men in black could serve as intermediaries, enforcing secrecy or observing human responses to its appearances. Some suggest that the figures are not human at all, but advanced entities capable of mimicking human behavior and form, designed to intimidate and influence. Others argue that the men in black are part of a shadowy human organization. Though their consistently bizarre behavior and the supernatural contexts in which they appear challenge conventional explanations. For those who have experienced both the Mothman and the men in black, the encounters often blend into a continuous story of fear, warning, and ambiguity. One eyewitness described seeing the creature hovering over the Ohio River one evening, its red eyes burning through the darkness, and then returning home to find a man in a black suit sitting silently in his living room, calmly reading a newspaper. The man did not speak but nodded slightly, as if confirming knowledge of the event. The witness left the room in terror and returned to find it empty, the newspaper untouched but no sign of the visitor. Such stories are common, emphasizing the disquieting relationship between Mothman sightings and these enigmatic figures. The modern Men in Black phenomenon has also intersected with popular culture and conspiracy theory. Some researchers link them to UFO lore, intelligence agencies, or secretive groups tasked with controlling information. Others treat them as part of the broader Mothman mythology, supernatural extensions of a creature that serves as a warning about disaster. Regardless of the theory, the effect on witnesses is consistent. A lingering fear, a sense of being watched, and the unnerving feeling that something beyond human comprehension is monitoring their actions. Even today, sightings of the Men in Black continue to be reported, from rural West Virginia to urban centers. Individuals who believe they have encountered the Mothman often describe being followed or contacted by these dark-suited figures. They are reminders that the legend of the Mothman has grown into a multifaceted mystery, one that blends creature sightings with human or perhaps not entirely human intervention. Their presence underscores the enduring nature of fear, secrecy, and the unknown, a warning that even in modern times, some stories refuse to remain silent, whether agents of protection, intimidation, or something beyond human understanding. The men in black are inseparable from the mythology of the Mothman. They remind us that encounters with the unknown rarely end with a single sighting. The red eyes may vanish into the night, but the black suits often linger, silently enforcing the message. Some things are not meant to be spoken of, yet they are impossible to forget. In the decades since the first Mothman sightings in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, the debate over its existence has been as enduring as the legend itself. Skeptics and scientists have long attempted to explain the phenomenon with rational, evidence-based theories, arguing that what witnesses perceive as a winged humanoid is nothing more than a combination of natural wildlife, optical illusions, and human psychology. Despite these explanations, the consistency and specificity of the reports continue to puzzle researchers and enthusiasts alike. Many scientists point to the local wildlife as the simplest explanation. The area surrounding Point Pleasant is home to a variety of birds, including large owls, hawks, and herons. Under certain lighting conditions, such as dusk or dawn, these birds can appear much larger and more imposing than they actually are. Their eyes can reflect light in a way that seems to glow red, especially in photographs or under artificial light, creating an effect that could easily be mistaken for the Mothman's infamous eyes. Combined with the stress and excitement of witnessing something unusual, the human mind can exaggerate features, assigning humanoid characteristics to animals in fleeting glimpses. Mass hysteria and social contagion are also popular explanations among skeptics. In the 1960s, when the first sightings were reported, Point Pleasant was already a town steeped in stories of the unusual. Once initial reports were published in local newspapers, more people began claiming sightings, often in similar locations and under similar conditions. Psychologists argue that this creates a feedback loop, where one person's perception influences another's, leading to a collective belief in something that may not physically exist. In this way, ordinary birds, shadows, or even distant lights could become the basis for repeated accounts of a terrifying, winged humanoid. Some skeptics also highlight the role of memory and suggestion in shaping witness accounts. Memories of frightening events are notoriously unreliable. The mind fills in gaps with details that feel consistent or culturally appropriate. After the initial reports of the Mothman, witnesses may have unconsciously added the creature's glowing red eyes or enormous wingspan to their recollections, influenced by newspapers, television reports, and local folklore. This theory helps explain why so many accounts are remarkably similar, even when the sightings occurred weeks or months apart. Despite these scientific explanations, one detail continues to defy simple rationalization: the glowing red eyes. Virtually every report from the 1960s, as well as modern sightings, emphasizes this feature. Witnesses describe eyes that pierce through the darkness, burning with an intensity that no natural reflection or bird's anatomy could replicate. Some have claimed that the eyes seem intelligent, following their movements, or locking onto them in a way that evokes awareness, rather than the random reflection one might expect from an owl or a reflective object. This consistency of detail across decades and hundreds of witnesses challenges skeptics to explain why so many people independently describe the same unsettling feature. Another complicating factor is the timing of sightings. Many reports occurred before disasters, most famously the collapse of the Silver Bridge in December 1967. Which killed 46 people. Skeptics argue that this is mere coincidence, a result of the intense attention the area received at the time. But believers see a pattern, suggesting that the Mothman may appear as a warning of impending tragedy. If these sightings were purely the product of misidentified birds or mass hysteria, it would be difficult to account for the recurring proximity to disastrous events. The link between sightings and real-world incidents continues to fuel debate and deepen the legend. Skeptics also struggle to reconcile accounts of the creature's size and behavior. Witnesses consistently describe a humanoid form with a wingspan far exceeding that of any known bird, capable of rapid, silent flight. Some accounts describe it swooping low over highways or rivers, appearing fully aware of human observers. These descriptions, repeated in hundreds of testimonies, make it challenging to attribute the phenomenon solely to misidentification or hysteria. While a combination of natural explanations may account for parts of the sightings, the uniformity and eerie details, particularly the glowing red eyes, remain inexplicable under conventional reasoning. Psychologists studying the phenomenon note that humans are wired to detect agency and intention, especially in ambiguous stimuli. A large shadow with glowing eyes can trigger a profound emotional response, interpreted as a creature with purpose and awareness. Skeptics argue that this neurological pattern explains much of the fear and storytelling surrounding the Mothman. Yet, even with this understanding, the persistent repetition of very specific details across numerous independent accounts suggests that something more than mere perception may be at play. The debate between skeptics and believers has shaped the Mothman's legacy. Scientists and rationalists emphasize natural explanations, cautioning against sensationalism and the human tendency toward myth-making. Their work is valuable, providing context and reason in a world where fear can distort reality. However, the sheer volume and consistency of reports continue to lend credence to those who argue that something unexplained is occurring. Even hardened skeptics often admit that while they may doubt the existence of a literal creature, the phenomenon itself, the reports, the sightings, and the psychological impact deserves study and attention. Ultimately, the story of the Mothman sits at the intersection of myth and reality, a place where science struggles to offer complete answers. Skeptics provide rational interpretations that make sense of some aspects: misidentified birds, reflective eyes, social contagion, and the power of suggestion. Yet they cannot fully explain why so many accounts share identical, chilling details, why glowing red eyes appear repeatedly in eyewitness reports, or why these sightings often precede tragedy. The tension between belief and skepticism ensures that the Mothman remains an enduring enigma, one that continues to haunt imaginations, research, and folklore alike. Even today, Point Pleasant and surrounding areas are alive with retellings of the sightings, each story a reminder that while science may explain much, some mysteries resist understanding. Skeptics may continue to argue that the Mothman is a combination of fear, perception, and coincidence, but for those who have seen it, and for those who study the patterns of its appearances, the legend endures as a chilling question mark. Glowing red in the darkness, staring back at humanity and refusing to be fully explained. The legend of the Mothman has endured for decades, but beyond the terrifying sightings and gruesome premonitions, some believe there is a deeper, more enigmatic purpose to the creature. To these observers, the Mothman is not simply a monster or a cryptid meant to inspire fear. It is something far older and more profound. It is a guardian of sorts, a being that transcends time and geography, appearing wherever catastrophe threatens, a silent sentinel whose presence serves as both warning and omen. Those who view the creature in this light call it the Eternal Watcher. Accounts from Point Pleasant in the 1960s describe the creature as a winged humanoid with glowing red eyes, capable of swift, silent flight. For many witnesses, it was terrifying, a nightmarish figure that defied logic. Yet, those who later studied its appearances began to notice a pattern. The Mothman rarely acts aggressively. It does not strike or harm, but instead observes. Its glowing eyes, though unsettling, seem to focus with purpose, as if measuring the unfolding events and recording the choices of humanity. It is in this behavior that some see the mark of a guardian rather than a predator, being bound not by malice, but by a duty to watch, to warn, and to bear witness. The idea of the Mothman as an eternal watcher expands the legend beyond Point Pleasant. Sightings across the world, such as the Freiburg Shrieker in Germany, the Black Bird of Chernobyl, and modern encounters in Kentucky share similar characteristics: winged, humanoid forms, red or glowing eyes, silent flight, and appearances preceding disaster. To believers, these repeated manifestations suggest a single entity or a class of entities tasked with observing humanity whenever danger is imminent. Its purpose is not understood, and its morality is ambiguous. It could be angel, demon, or some force entirely beyond human comprehension. Yet its watchful presence implies a higher order, a cosmic balance between catastrophe and the knowledge of what is to come. Witnesses often describe a profound psychological effect during encounters. Unlike typical predators, the Mothman does not attack. Instead, it watches with an intensity that inspires fear, awe, and sometimes even clarity. Some claim that seeing the creature before a disaster has saved their lives, guiding them away from danger almost instinctively. Others report a sense of warning, a chilling awareness that something terrible is about to happen, a feeling so overwhelming it cannot be ignored. The creature's gaze, burning red in the darkness, communicates without words. It is a silent messenger, an observer of humanity's fragility. Legends say the Mothman's guardianship is ancient, not tied to a single culture or era. From ancient myths of winged omens to modern cryptid reports, the pattern is striking. Across time and space, witnesses have glimpsed winged, humanoid beings during moments of impending disaster. Some theorists suggest that the Mothman is a timeless entity, appearing wherever human actions intersect with catastrophe. Bound to watch and record, neither fully benevolent nor wholly malevolent, it is a paradoxical figure, terrifying in appearance, yet serving a higher purpose that often escapes human understanding. In this interpretation, the Mothman's terrifying features serve a functional role. Its massive wings allow it to move swiftly and silently, appearing at a moment when its observation is most crucial. Its glowing red eyes strike fear into the hearts of those who see it, compelling them to take notice, to consider the signs, and perhaps to change course. The horror it inspires is not malicious, but instructive, a visceral reminder that humanity is fragile, and that some forces, whether natural or supernatural, are beyond control. The creature's very presence may be a call to awareness, a warning that disaster can strike at any moment, and that vigilance is a necessary response. Even the modern sightings reinforce the concept of the eternal watcher. Travelers in rural Kentucky describe the figure gliding silently over highways, vanishing into the trees, yet leaving a lingering sense of unease. Witnesses in New York and elsewhere have reported winged, red-eyed entities before natural or man-made disasters. In each case, the creature appears with intent, seemingly tied to the threads of fate, observing the moments leading up to calamity. Its appearances are not random but purposeful, suggesting an intelligence and awareness that is difficult to reconcile with ordinary explanations. The Eternal Watcher theory also provides a lens through which to view the Mothman's connection to the Men in Black. Some witnesses report that after seeing the creature, strange figures in black suits appear, warning them to remain silent. If the Mothman is a guardian, these emissaries, whether human, supernatural, or something in between, may serve as facilitators, ensuring that knowledge of impending disasters is handled carefully. This adds another layer to the legend. The Mothman is not alone in its vigilance, but may operate within a network of enigmatic entities, tasked with observing and influencing humanity in subtle ways. Whether angelic or demonic, protective or ominous, the Mothman's role as the Eternal Watcher reframes the creature in human imagination. It is no longer merely a cryptid to be feared, but a symbol of humanity's vulnerability, the fragility of life, and the unseen forces that may shape the world. Its appearances silent, swift, and startling serve as reminders that some mysteries persist beyond human understanding, and that observation itself can be a powerful act. In the end, the legend of the Mothman endures not only because of terror, but because of meaning. For those who see it as the Eternal Watcher, the creature is a guardian perched between shadow and light, observing humanity with an unblinking gaze. It appears where disaster looms, hovering on the edge of perception, leaving witnesses with an unsettling sense of warning and reverence. Whether harbinger, protector, or something beyond human comprehension, the Mothman reminds us that the world is full of forces we cannot fully explain, and that some watchers are eternal, always observing, always present, and forever perched between fear and fascination. And there you have it, the 25 most haunting legends of the Mothman. From the dark hills of West Virginia to the cities of Europe and beyond, the creature continues to appear where fear and tragedy collide. What is it really? A warning, a curse, or something far beyond human understanding? One thing is certain, the Mothman endures. And if you ever find yourself alone at night and hear wings beating in the dark, remember this story and pray those glowing red eyes don't find you. Thank you for wandering into the shadows with me tonight. If you enjoyed our journey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss another story from the darkness. Until next time, keep your eyes on the skies.